Snow settles softly along the edges of Victorian London, muffling hoofbeats and voices as Christmas approaches. Behind tall windows glowing gold with candlelight, laughter drifts through parlours dressed in holly and velvet. Porcelain cups are raised. A pale, milky drink is passed from hand to hand, warm, comforting, respectable. No one calls it a drug. No one questions why their limbs grow heavy, why conversation slows, why the edges of thought gently blur. In the most refined homes of the city, something narcotic is being served with Christmas cheer. Before we go further, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. These stories are best shared quietly, from one flickering room to another. This is not a tale of slums or desperation. This is a secret kept by silk dresses, polished silver, and doctors' signatures. In Victorian high society, fatigue was weakness, sorrow was indecent, and nerves were a fashionable affliction that demanded treatment. So calm was poured into cups, sleep was brewed on the stove, poppy milk drawn from the same source as opium was offered as nourishment, as medicine, as a gentle aid for the season's strain. Mothers gave it, guests accepted it, physicians praised it, and no one yet spoke of dependence. Tonight, we step into those lamplit rooms and uncover a dark, Victorian Christmas secret. Why high society drank poppy milk, how it became a seasonal comfort, and what it reveals about an age that wrapped chemical escape in tradition, refinement, and festive grace. Snow falls differently in the wealthy quarters of Victorian London. It does not rush or swirl. It settles. It drapes itself gently along iron railings and window ledges, softening the city into something quieter, more obedient. The streets are hushed beneath it, the usual clatter of wheels and boots reduced to a muted murmur. Christmas has arrived, and with it, the performance of calm. Behind heavy curtains, the night is carefully arranged. Gaslight glows amber against polished wood and gilt frames. Evergreen boughs are pinned with ribbon, their sharp scent mixing with coal smoke and beeswax. Clocks tick with deliberate patience. Nothing here is accidental. Even comfort is staged. In these rooms, winter is not endured, it is managed. Fires burn at the correct height. Chairs are arranged for conversation that must never become too earnest. Servants move soundlessly, trained to anticipate rather than interrupt, and on side tables, among china and crystal, waits a drink that does not announce itself. Pale, warm, mildly sweet. It carries none of the harshness of spirits, none of the bitterness of medicine. It looks like care made liquid. It is offered without ceremony. A hostess pours it herself, smiling gently, assuring her guests it will take the edge off the cold, the travel, the long evening ahead. A mother lifts a cup toward her daughter, encouraging a few sips before bed. A husband suggests it to his wife, noticing the tightness in her shoulders, the faint tremor in her hands. No one calls it indulgence. It is spoken of as practical, necessary even. Victorian society prides itself on discipline, yet December strains that discipline to its limits. The season demands cheer from those who feel none, sociability from those already exhausted, reverence from minds dulled by routine and grief. Appearances must be maintained, emotions must be smoothed, fatigue must not show. And so the solution arrives quietly, not in bottles that clink or glasses that burn, but in a milky draught that promises rest without disgrace. This is the great contradiction of the age, a culture obsessed with control, willingly surrendering consciousness by degrees. The drink works slowly, muscles loosen, thoughts grow less sharp at the edges. The endless calculations of propriety soften, voices lower. The room becomes still, not with silence, but with compliance, a manageable stillness, a civilized one. Outside, the city continues to breathe beneath its blanket of snow. Somewhere, bells ring for midnight mass. Somewhere else, a carriage rattles toward a party still hours from ending. Inside these homes, time stretches. Conversations repeat themselves. Laughter arrives late and leaves early. Eyes linger longer on the fire. No one notices how often the cups are refilled. There is comfort here, undeniably. Relief from strain that has no other sanctioned outlet. In a world where rest is seen as moral weakness and emotional need as personal failure, this small chemical mercy feels like grace. It does not challenge the rules, it helps people endure them. And yet, beneath the polished calm, something shifts. The body learns. The mind remembers the warmth, the ease, the gentle blurring of responsibility. What begins as seasonal aid settles into habit. What is poured for Christmas becomes welcome long after the decorations are taken down. The snow outside will melt by morning, trampled into slush by boots and wheels. But inside these curtained rooms, another kind of accumulation has begun, unseen, unremarked, and perfectly respectable. The season of peace has found its secret ingredient, and Victorian London will drink it without asking what it truly costs. London does not sleep easily in winter. Even beneath snow and shortened days, the city hums with obligation. Lamps are lit earlier, shops stay open later, invitations multiply, and the calendar fills with dinners, services, visits, and appearances that cannot be refused without consequence. To withdraw is to be noticed. To rest too long is to invite speculation. Idleness, in this city, is treated not as recovery but as decay. Victorian London believes deeply in motion. Progress must be visible. Industry must be constant. Bodies must endure. The empire expands by effort, and effort becomes virtue in itself. Weariness is not an acceptable outcome of labor. It is a personal flaw, a sign of weak constitution or flawed character. Those who falter are not encouraged to stop, they are encouraged to correct themselves. This belief settles most firmly on the upper classes, who are expected to embody composure regardless of strain. They do not toil in factories, but they perform a different kind of work, hosting, supervising, presenting, enduring. The home is both refuge and stage, and every gathering is an examination. A hostess must appear tireless, a wife must appear serene, a gentleman must appear alert, engaged, untroubled by the weight of responsibility. There is no sanctioned space for collapse. Winter magnifies the problem. Daylight shrinks, bodies crave stillness, spirits sink, the cold presses inward, and the mind resists the effort required to remain bright, conversational, correct. Yet Christmas demands the opposite. The season insists on warmth, generosity, sociability, cheer. The contradiction is sharp, and Victorian London resolves it the only way it knows how, by refusing to slow. Medical language eagerly supports this refusal. Doctors speak of nervous depletion, winter languor, seasonal weakness, but the recommended cures rarely include rest. Instead, they prescribe stimulation or sedation as needed, adjusting the body so it can continue. The goal is not health in the modern sense, it is functionality. A patient who can perform is a patient considered well enough. This attitude seeps into every corner of respectable life. A woman who feels faint is told her nerves are overstimulated. A man who cannot sleep is assured his mind is overactive. Neither is advised to withdraw from society. They are advised to manage themselves better, to regulate, to take something. Thus the city develops an unspoken rule. You may not stop, but you may soften. You may dull the sharpest edges of awareness. You may quiet the body enough to keep it moving. Relief is permitted only if it does not interfere with duty, and preferably if it makes duty easier. Christmas becomes the ultimate test of this philosophy. The season's rituals stack atop an already heavy social load. Church attendance increases, charity visits are expected, meals lengthen. Travel intensifies. Family tensions surface beneath enforced harmony. Grief sharpens in the presence of celebration. All of it must be borne with grace. And so London finds ways to keep itself awake without fully being conscious. The city does not rest, it anesthetizes. In parlors and bedrooms, substances are introduced that promise calm without collapse, sleep without surrender, comfort without moral stain. They do not challenge the demand for constant performance, they enable it. What is striking is how little resistance there is. Few question whether a society that requires chemical assistance to maintain its rituals might be asking too much. Instead, the solution is folded neatly into the existing order. The city continues, appearances hold. Christmas is observed properly. Outside, the streets glow with frost and lamplight. Inside, bodies are coaxed into cooperation. London moves forward, not because its people are rested, but because they have learned how to silence the signals that tell them they should be. Exhaustion in Victorian high society is never named directly. It is hinted at, softened, dressed in gentler language. A lady is not tired, she is delicate. A gentleman is not overwhelmed, he is overextended. Fatigue is translated into manners, into posture, into the careful arrangement of words that make suffering sound like temperament rather than strain. Among the upper classes, weariness becomes a private condition endured in public silence. There is no vocabulary for stopping. The day begins early with correspondence and supervision, moves through visits, committees, and social obligations, and ends late beneath gaslight, where conversation must still sparkle. Even leisure requires performance. One must be seen enjoying oneself correctly. The body, however, keeps its own accounts. Muscles tighten, sleep fragments, appetites dull or sharpen unpredictably, hands tremble faintly when teacups are lifted, thoughts loop and repeat. These signs are not treated as warnings, they are treated as inconveniences, interruptions to be smoothed away. For women especially, exhaustion is both expected and denied. The ideal Victorian woman is fragile by design, her sensitivity praised even as it imprisons her. She is responsible for the emotional climate of the home, the smoothness of gatherings, the comfort of guests. She must absorb tension without showing it, soothe others while ignoring her own depletion. When she falters, it is explained as nervousness, hysteria, or seasonal weakness, conditions that invite treatment, not relief. Men fare little better, though their fatigue wears a different mask. They are burdened by responsibility, by commerce, by governance, by the unrelenting demand to lead. Rest threatens to look like laziness, so they continue, fueled by stimulants by day and sedatives by night, calibrating themselves like machines rather than living bodies. This exhaustion is polite because it must be. It bows, it smiles, it hosts Christmas dinners while silently counting the hours until they end. It accepts remedies offered in good faith, especially those that do not carry the vulgar stigma of intoxication. Anything openly pleasurable risks moral suspicion. Anything medicinal is welcomed. Thus, the upper classes become expert consumers of sanctioned relief. They seek substances that promise balance rather than escape, composure rather than oblivion. The ideal remedy does not alter one's role, it makes the role easier to perform. It allows a hostess to sit upright through another evening. It allows a mother to sleep through the night. It allows a husband to wake without dread. Poppy-derived preparations slip easily into this landscape. They do not shout, they do not burn, they do not announce themselves as indulgence. They arrive wrapped in the language of care, administered by doctors who understand the unspoken contract. Do not dismantle the system, make it tolerable. What no one says aloud is that exhaustion itself has become a defining feature of respectability. To be worn thin is proof of one's usefulness, one's participation in the grand machinery of society. Rest would suggest disengagement. To admit the need for it would be to confess inadequacy. And so exhaustion is polished into something almost admirable. It becomes part of the aesthetic of refinement. Pale complexions, slow movements, quiet voices. The body's protest is reinterpreted as elegance. By the time Christmas arrives, this polite exhaustion has already hollowed the household. The season merely exposes what has been accumulating all year. And when relief is offered warm, sweet, and promising ease, it feels less like temptation and more like mercy. It enters the household without drama, no sealed bottle, no warning label, no sharp medicinal scent to announce its presence. It is pale and mild, carried in an ordinary jug, warmed gently on the stove like any other evening comfort. Milk, sweetened slightly, smoothed until it looks indistinguishable from nourishment itself. Only those who know doctors, chemists, seasoned mothers understand that something else lingers beneath the surface. Poppy milk does not demand attention. That is its great advantage. It blends into domestic rituals so seamlessly that it appears to have always belonged there. A cup offered before bed, a spoonful suggested after a long day, a small draught taken during winter evenings when the cold presses into bone and spirit alike. It is not introduced as a remedy for pain or sorrow, but as a general kindness, something to take the edge off living. Its origins are rarely discussed at the table. Few guests ask where it comes from, and fewer still wish to know. The poppy fields lie far away, both geographically and morally. By the time their yield reaches a London parlour, it has been softened, diluted, civilized. Stripped of its harsher associations, it arrives as something maternal, almost innocent. Milk has always been the language of care. Sugar speaks of comfort. Together, they disguise what flows beneath. Chemists speak of it carefully, using terms that reassure rather than alarm. It is described as calming, settling, beneficial to the nerves. Particularly suited, they say, to women and children. Particularly helpful during winter, when the body resists sleep and the mind grows restless. There is no talk of risk, no suggestion that the relief it provides might demand repayment. Within the home, its use spreads quietly. A mother gives it to her daughter, who has been overwrought by lessons and expectations. A nurse administers it to a child who cannot sleep on Christmas Eve, too excited, too stimulated by candlelight and anticipation. A hostess takes a small cup herself before welcoming guests, steadying her breath, smoothing her expression. Each act feels separate, reasonable, controlled. What distinguishes poppy milk from other substances is its ability to pass unnoticed. It does not intoxicate in the vulgar sense. There is no laughter too loud, no words slurred, no loss of posture. Instead, there is a gentle lowering of intensity. The room grows quieter, movements slow, emotions flatten just enough to become manageable. The effect is subtle, and therefore trusted. It is often taken alongside other comforts after a meal, beside the fire, beneath thick blankets. The body receives it as it would any evening ritual, learning to associate warmth with relief, sweetness with rest. Over time, the absence of the drink becomes more noticeable than its presence. Nights feel longer without it. Thoughts refuse to settle. The body resists sleep with unfamiliar stubbornness. Still, no alarm is raised. The quantities are small, the intentions are good, and the drink itself appears so harmless. Milk has always nourished, sugar has always pleased. What danger could hide within such familiar things? The answer lies not in immediate collapse, but in quiet adaptation. The body adjusts. What once softened becomes necessary. What was offered occasionally is now expected. The household does not mark this transition. There is no moment when someone says, "We have begun to rely on this." Dependence announces itself not with crisis, but with routine. By the time Christmas passes and the decorations are stored away, the jug remains. The cups continue to be filled. The city outside returns to its ordinary pace, but inside these homes, something has shifted. Milk and sugar still sit at the surface. Beneath them, something more has taken root, unseen, unspoken, and perfectly at ease in the heart of respectability. In Victorian London, medicine does not wear the face of danger. It presents itself as reassurance, measured, rational, spoken in calm voices by men whose authority rests on education and restraint. A doctor's visit is not meant to alarm, it is meant to restore order. Whatever is prescribed must fit neatly into the moral architecture of the household. It must heal without scandal. It must soothe without inviting suspicion. This is how poppy-derived remedies thrive. They arrive not as indulgence, but as instruction. Physicians of the era are deeply aware of their audience. They do not treat bodies alone, they treat reputations. A respectable patient cannot be seen as weak-willed or reckless. Any treatment offered must protect dignity as much as health. Narcotics, when framed correctly, do exactly that. They are not pleasures, they are corrections, adjustments, necessary interventions for a nervous age. Medical journals speak carefully. They avoid language that suggests intoxication or escape. Instead, they discuss balance, moderation, equilibrium. The nervous system is portrayed as delicate machinery, easily overstimulated by modern life. Urban noise, intellectual strain, social obligation, seasonal darkness, all are listed as forces that tax the mind beyond its natural limits. The solution is not withdrawal from society that would be unthinkable, but chemical assistance. Doctors recommend poppy milk precisely because it does not appear drastic. It is not administered by needle. It does not sting or burn. It does not demand isolation or bed rest. It allows the patient to remain present, functional, composed. In this sense, it is ideal, a remedy that corrects discomfort without disrupting routine. There is also comfort in its familiarity. Milk has long been associated with infancy, nourishment, maternal care. To infuse it with medicine is to blur the boundary between treatment and nurture. Patients accept it instinctively. Mothers trust it. Nurses administer it without hesitation. It feels less like taking a drug and more like receiving kindness. This familiarity grants it moral immunity. While gin carries the stain of vice and laudanum whispers of desperation, poppy milk occupies a gentler category. It is domestic, quiet, private, taken at home, under supervision, in appropriate amounts. There is no shame attached to its use, because shame requires an audience, and this medicine is consumed behind closed doors. Doctors reinforce this safety through language. They speak of mild sedation, restorative calm, assistance with sleep. They do not dwell on origins. The poppy is rarely mentioned directly. When it is described botanically, scientifically, stripped of its more troubling associations. Chemistry, after all, is progress, and progress is trusted. Even when use becomes regular, it remains medically sanctioned. Prescriptions are renewed without fuss. Slight increases in dosage are justified by worsening symptoms. Symptoms often caused by the very reliance being reinforced. The patient reports difficulty sleeping. The doctor responds with reassurance and a small adjustment. No one questions the pattern. What makes this system so effective is its mutual convenience. Patients receive relief without stigma. Doctors maintain authority without conflict. Society continues to function without confronting its own exhaustion. The medicine becomes a quiet collaborator in preserving appearances. There are, occasionally, dissenting voices. A few physicians express concern about prolonged use, about patients who grow strangely indifferent, whose vitality seems dulled rather than restored. But these observations are tentative, buried beneath prevailing optimism. To question a widely accepted remedy is to risk professional isolation, and so caution is muted. By Christmas, When doctors are busiest and households most strained, poppy milk becomes an almost seasonal recommendation, a support for nerves, a helper for sleep, a means of enduring the demands of celebration without faltering. Its use is so normalized that to refuse it might appear stubborn, even negligent. Thus, medicine, meant to guard health, becomes a conduit for dependence, though no one yet has the language to describe it as such. There is no shame, because shame requires recognition. And recognition, in this case, has been carefully anesthetized. The remedy remains respectable, the doctors remain confident, and the households of Victorian London continue to pour their relief into cups, trusting that anything approved by science and delivered so gently could never truly harm them. By December, the doctor's advice changes its rhythm. The same remedies are offered, but now with a seasonal softness, as though the calendar itself justifies indulgence. Winter, physicians remind their patients, places unique demands on the nervous system. The cold constricts the body, darkness unsettles the mind, festivities exhaust even the robust. Christmas, they say, is not merely a holiday, it is a physiological trial. Appointments lengthen, advice becomes more accommodating. Where restraint might be urged in spring, December allows for generosity. A little more calm is permitted, a little deeper sleep is encouraged. The language of moderation stretches just enough to accommodate necessity. Poppy milk finds its way into these conversations with increasing ease. Doctors recommend it as one might suggest a shawl or a fire built higher against the cold. It is framed as seasonal protection, a buffer between the body and the strain of obligation. Taken at night, it promises rest. Taken before gatherings, it promises composure. Taken regularly through the holidays, it promises survival. Christmas creates the perfect conditions for such prescriptions. Households swell with visitors. Meals lengthen into hours. Old grievances resurface beneath forced cheer. Mourning grows sharper amid celebration, especially for those who have lost children, parents, or spouses. The season is supposed to heal, yet it often exposes wounds. The doctor understands this. He does not urge his patients to confront grief or reduce obligation. He offers them a way to endure. What is prescribed is not escape, but endurance made tolerable. Women receive the majority of these seasonal recommendations. Their responsibilities multiply in December, yet their permitted range of emotion does not expand to match. They must host flawlessly. They must soothe family tensions. They must remain gentle, attentive, uncomplaining. The doctor's remedy becomes a quiet ally, allowing them to meet impossible expectations without visible fracture. Children, too, are drawn into this cycle. Excitement disrupts their sleep. Cold worsens coughs and restlessness. A spoonful of poppy milk before bed is offered as kindness, not control. It calms without struggle. It brings silence without tears. Christmas Eve passes peacefully. No one asks whether peace achieved chemically differs from peace earned. Men receive their own prescriptions, though spoken differently. They are advised to take something to quiet the mind after long days of commerce and duty, to ease the transition from public authority to domestic presence. The drink helps them sit by the fire without restlessness, to listen without impatience, to sleep without the mind racing ahead to January's demands. What makes these prescriptions particularly effective is their framing as temporary. The doctor assures his patients this is only for the season, just until the holidays pass, just until the light returns. The implication is clear. Nothing lasting is taking place. This is merely assistance through a difficult stretch. But the body does not recognize the calendar's promises. It responds only to patterns. Night after night, the same relief arrives. The same warmth spreads. The same quiet settles over thought and muscle. Christmas becomes associated not only with tradition and ritual, but with chemical reassurance. The season trains the body to expect it. By 12th night, When decorations are removed and the year turns forward, the prescription does not vanish. Fatigue remains. The city resumes its pace without mercy. The relief that carried households through December is still close at hand, still socially approved, still medically endorsed. Why abandon what works? Doctors do not press the matter. Their role, as they understand it, is to maintain function. If a remedy allows their patients to continue without complaint, it has done its job. The question of long-term consequence remains abstract, distant, easily postponed. Thus, Christmas, intended as a moment of rest, becomes instead an initiation, a sanctioned introduction to regular sedation. The season passes, but the habit lingers, wrapped in the memory of warmth, celebration, and the quiet certainty that this medicine arrived when it was most needed. Sleep, in Victorian London, is no longer something that simply arrives. It must be negotiated, persuaded, sometimes coaxed into being. The city's rhythms have grown too sharp, its expectations too constant, for rest to come unassisted. Minds linger over unfinished duties. Bodies remain tense long after the fire has been banked low. Night becomes another obligation to be managed, rather than a refuge to surrender to. Poppy milk offers itself as an intermediary between wakefulness and oblivion. Its first impression is deceptively gentle. Warmth spreads across the tongue, softened by sugar, familiar as childhood comfort. There is no bitterness to warn the senses, no sharp edge to suggest danger. It tastes like something meant to be trusted. The effect does not rush. That is part of its appeal. It does not seize the mind or overwhelm the body. Instead, it moves gradually, like dusk overtaking daylight. Muscles loosen almost without notice. Breathing deepens. The constant low tension that hums beneath thought begins to fade. Concerns that felt urgent moments before drift slightly out of reach. This is the sleep Victorian households come to value most, not the sudden collapse of exhaustion, but a controlled descent, a rest that feels earned, even dignified. The body remains obedient, posture intact, speech still measured if words are spoken at all. The self does not disappear, it softens. In bedrooms across the city, the same ritual unfolds. Curtains are drawn, lamps are dimmed. A final cup is taken while seated upright, often accompanied by quiet conversation or reading. The drink marks the transition from the demands of the day to the expectation of rest. Over time, the body learns this signal well. Without it, night feels incomplete, unsettled. What is most striking is how poppy milk alters the texture of sleep itself. Dreams lose their sharpness, nightmares recede. Even grief seems to dull, its edges smoothed until it no longer wakes the sleeper abruptly. Sleep becomes heavier, thicker, less easily disturbed. For those accustomed to restless nights, this feels miraculous. Morning brings its own rewards. There is no hangover, no sour taste, no obvious penalty. The sleeper wakes slowly but calmly, emotions muted just enough to make the coming day manageable. Compared to the violence of spirits or the raw force of stronger sedatives, this seems a triumph of refinement. Yet something subtle is lost. The sleep is not restorative in the way nature intends. It does not refresh so much as suspend. The body rests, but the mind does not fully reset. Upon waking, there is often a faint heaviness, a sense that clarity has been postponed rather than renewed. Still, this discomfort is mild, easily dismissed, especially when weighed against the terror of returning insomnia. Households begin to speak of good nights and bad nights, quietly noting which coincide with the presence or absence of the drink. The pattern becomes difficult to ignore. Sleep without poppy milk feels thinner, more fragile. Dreams return with uncomfortable vividness. The body protests the change. No one names this reliance. It is framed instead as preference, as practicality, as choosing what works best. After all, the substance does not announce itself as powerful. It merely encourages what should have happened naturally, or so it seems. The taste itself becomes symbolic. Sweetness comes to mean safety. Warmth becomes synonymous with rest. The sensory memory of the drink lodges deep within the body, linking comfort to chemical calm. Over time, even the act of lifting the cup begins to relax the muscles in anticipation. This is how the taste of sleep reshapes habit, not through force, but through familiarity, not through excess, but through repetition. Victorian London does not fall into unconsciousness. It drifts there nightly, guided by something that tastes like care and feels like mercy. And as winter nights continue, the city grows accustomed to sleeping this way, less aware, less troubled, less awake than before, never questioning whether the calm it craves is truly rest, or merely the absence of discomfort carefully engineered to feel like peace. In Victorian London, the true danger of any substance is not its effect on the body, but its effect on reputation. What ruins a family is rarely illness itself, but the appearance of moral failure. Respectability is fragile, upheld by custom, discretion, and the careful avoidance of anything that suggests excess. And so the safest indulgence is one that does not look like indulgence at all. Poppy milk succeeds where other comforts fail because it carries none of the visible markers of vice. It is not poured into tumblers or hidden in decanters. It is served in porcelain, sometimes delicately patterned, sometimes plain and practical. It sits easily beside tea, cocoa, or warm milk, indistinguishable to the untrained eye. There is no ritual of concealment, because concealment implies wrongdoing. This drink requires none. Alcohol, even when consumed privately, bears a social stain. Gin is associated with the poor, whiskey with coarseness, wine with appetite, and loosened restraint. Laudanum, though respectable in certain circles, carries a whisper of desperation, something taken when pain or despair has already breached the surface. Poppy milk avoids all of this. It presents itself as moderation embodied. The teacup becomes its shield. Tea, after all, is the great symbol of Victorian order, measured, civilized, ritualized. It structures the day, calms conversation, enforces pauses without encouraging idleness. To drink from a teacup is to participate in social discipline. When poppy milk is served in the same vessel, it inherits that discipline by association. Guests accept it without comment. Hosts offer it with confidence. No one lowers their voice or glances toward the door. It is not consumed furtively, but openly, even proudly, as evidence of good household management. A home that provides comfort is a successful home. A hostess who anticipates fatigue is considered thoughtful, not indulgent. This respectability extends to language. The drink is rarely named precisely. It is referred to vaguely as a tonic, a restorative, something calming. Specifics are unnecessary. To name the poppy too directly would invite questions, and questions disrupt harmony. The vagueness itself is protective, allowing everyone involved to maintain plausible innocence. Servants observe this ritual closely. They pour the drink, warm it, clear the cups, yet are rarely invited to partake themselves. For them, the substance carries a different meaning, less refinement, more control. But among the upper classes, its use remains framed as choice, not necessity. The distinction matters deeply. What poppy milk offers is not merely chemical relief, but social insulation. It allows individuals to manage their inner lives without altering outward behavior. Emotions are dampened before they can surface. Fatigue is softened before it can become visible. The social performance continues uninterrupted. This is why the practice spreads so easily. It solves a problem Victorian society refuses to acknowledge, that constant composure is unsustainable. Rather than adjust expectations, the culture adjusts chemistry. The teacup becomes a tool of compliance. helping bodies conform to ideals they cannot naturally sustain. Even moral authorities remain largely silent. Clergy may caution against excess, but excess is not what they see. There are no scenes of revelry, no neglect of duty, no collapse of order. Families continue to attend church, to host charity events, to fulfill obligations. If anything, they appear calmer, more settled, more devout. The substance seems to support virtue rather than undermine it. And so poppy milk remains untouched by scandal. It hides in plain sight, protected by porcelain and politeness. Respectability does not merely tolerate it, it depends on it. The city's most disciplined lives are quietly stabilized by something they insist is harmless, something they believe is beneath suspicion. Yet, the teacup does not care about appearances. It delivers its contents faithfully, night after night, indifferent to the social meanings layered upon it. And while respectability shields the habit from scrutiny, it also ensures it will persist unchallenged long after the line between choice and need has quietly dissolved. Victorian morality is deeply sensory. Vice announces itself through the nose as much as through behavior. Gin reeks, spirits cling to breath and clothing. Opium smoke curls visibly, leaving traces on curtains and lungs alike. Even laudanum carries a medicinal bitterness that cannot be fully disguised. Smell, in this society, is evidence. It betrays indulgence. It lingers after denial. Poppy milk has none of this. It leaves no sharpness in the air, no residue on the tongue that might provoke suspicion. When the cup is empty, there is only the faint sweetness of sugar and the comfort of warmth. The room smells, as it always has, of beeswax, coal smoke, evergreen, and polished wood. Nothing announces that a narcotic has passed through the body. This absence becomes its greatest protection. In households where reputation must be guarded with vigilance, invisibility is a virtue. The ability to take something powerful without leaving a trace allows families to preserve the illusion of self-mastery. There is no need to open windows in shame, no need to explain flushed cheeks or heavy speech. The substance works quietly, politely, respecting the boundaries of appearance. This matters enormously in a culture where domestic space is moral territory. The home is expected to be clean not only in body but in spirit. Any hint of corruption threatens the entire household's standing. Poppy milk slips through these expectations without friction. It does not challenge the idea that virtue resides within walls kept orderly and pure. Servants notice this difference immediately. They smell alcohol long before it is acknowledged. They recognize the signs of laudanum use even when masters pretend otherwise. But poppy milk offers no such clues. It blends into routine so thoroughly that even those tasked with maintaining the household cannot always tell when it has been taken. The absence of scent allows the habit to spread without comment. Doctors, too, find comfort in this neutrality. A medicine that does not announce itself feels safer, more controlled. There are no complaints from neighbors, no visible signs of misuse that might invite scrutiny. The practice remains private, insulated from public judgment. What happens within the home stays there, undetected. This invisibility reshapes moral reasoning. Without sensory cues to trigger concern, the mind finds no reason to question. The drink does not feel dangerous. It does not resemble the substances society has learned to fear. Instead, it aligns itself with cleanliness, warmth, and order, the very qualities Victorian culture equates with goodness. Even dependence, when it begins to form, carries no smell. There is no moment when a household wakes to an odor that forces recognition. The transition from choice to need happens without ceremony. Cups are poured because they always have been. The ritual continues uninterrupted. There are moments, rarely spoken of, when something feels off. A guest grows unusually quiet. A hostess seems distant, her eyes unfocused, her responses delayed. A child sleeps too deeply, too long. but without obvious markers, these moments are easily dismissed. Fatigue explains them. Winter explains them. The season excuses all. What is most unsettling is how this absence of evidence trains the conscience. When wrongdoing leaves no trace, it becomes difficult to define. Without smell, without spectacle, without collapse, moral categories blur. The question shifts from "is this right?" to "does this work?" And poppy milk works remarkably well. Thus, the substance occupies a strange moral space, potent yet pure, powerful yet polite. It does not stain curtains or consciences. It does not force confession. It simply settles into bodies and routines, shaping them gently from within. In a city obsessed with surface order, the lack of smell becomes permission. Permission to continue. Permission to ignore. Permission to believe that whatever leaves no mark must be harmless. And so Victorian London learns to trust what it cannot sense, allowing a quiet dependence to flourish precisely because it offends none of the senses trained to detect sin. There is a particular quiet that settles over a room once poppy milk has done its work. It is not the silence of absence, nor the awkward hush of things unsaid. It is thicker than that, weighted, a calm that presses gently downward, smoothing sharp thoughts, rounding the corners of emotion until nothing catches or resists. Victorian households come to recognize this silence well, even if they never name it. Conversation slows first, words arrive with greater care, then less frequently. Laughter softens, losing its edge, becoming polite rather than spontaneous. Disagreements that might have flared instead dissolve into pauses, glances toward the fire, small nods of concession. The substance does not argue, it persuades. It does not suppress forcefully, it invites compliance. In drawing rooms, this quiet is mistaken for harmony. Guests sit comfortably, hands folded, gazes resting somewhere unfocused but content. The evening proceeds without incident. No one storms out. No one weeps openly. The household appears well governed, emotionally balanced, successful in its management of people and mood alike. This is the silence Victorian society values most, the kind that suggests control. Yet, beneath it, something vital recedes. Emotional range narrows, curiosity dulls, urgency evaporates. The small inner movements that lead to reflection, confrontation, or change are gently discouraged. Why examine discomfort when it can be quieted? Why speak difficult truths when the atmosphere remains so agreeable? Children raised in these rooms absorb this lesson early. They learn that stillness is praised, that quiet compliance is rewarded. A child who sleeps deeply and wakes calm is considered well cared for. One who protests, who cannot settle, who asks too many questions at night, is gently corrected with another spoonful, another assurance, another invitation to silence. Adults internalize the same expectation. Emotional restraint becomes not merely a virtue, but a habit reinforced chemically. Grief that might have demanded acknowledgement is softened until it can be endured without disruption. Anxiety that might have prompted change is quieted until it no longer presses. Even joy loses some of its intensity, becoming muted, manageable, safe. The silence spreads beyond individual rooms. In households where poppy milk becomes routine, fewer difficult conversations take place. Tensions are deferred rather than resolved. Resentments sink inward instead of surfacing. The appearance of peace is maintained, even as underlying issues remain untouched. Doctors note this calm approvingly. Patients report fewer complaints. Sleep improves. Emotional volatility decreases. From a clinical perspective, the treatment appears effective. There is no chaos to address, no crisis to manage. The absence of distress is taken as evidence of success. What no one measures is what this silence replaces: the restless questioning, the necessary discomfort, the moments of emotional clarity that emerge only when pain is felt fully rather than dulled. By removing these, poppy milk does more than soothe, it reshapes inner life. In Victorian culture, silence is often equated with morality. Loud emotions are suspect. Visible struggle implies weakness. The quiet produced by poppy milk aligns perfectly with these values. It reinforces the belief that good people are calm people, that virtue expresses itself through stillness rather than engagement. And so the silence is welcomed, encouraged, replicated. Night after night, it settles over the city's most respectable homes, pressing gently against walls lined with books and portraits, seeping into bedrooms and nurseries alike. It does not announce itself as loss. It feels like relief, like order restored. But silence, once cultivated, demands maintenance. The body learns to expect it. The mind resists its absence. When nights grow restless again, when thoughts sharpen, when emotions stir, the contrast feels unbearable. The quiet must be restored. Thus, the silence poppy milk produces becomes not merely an effect, but a goal, something to be achieved, preserved, defended against interruption. And in pursuing it, Victorian London learns to trade awareness for peace, engagement for ease, never quite noticing how much has been given up, because what remains is so beautifully, convincingly quiet. The journey begins far from the quiet kitchens and lamplit parlours of Victorian London. It starts in fields that most consumers will never see, under skies that do not glow with gaslight, and streets that do not hum with social obligation. The poppy grows without ceremony, its petals fragile, its stem unassuming. Nothing about the plant suggests the power it carries. It sways gently in open ground, obedient to weather and season, indifferent to the futures it will shape. Harvesting is methodical, almost tender. The pod is scored carefully, just enough to release its pale sap. The latex bead slowly thickens, darkens, and is collected once dried. This process is old, practiced long before Victorian science claimed it as its own. Empires have always known the poppy's value. What changes in the 19th century is not the substance itself, but the distance placed between its origin and its consumption. By the time poppy derivatives reach Britain, they are stripped of context. The raw plant is transformed through refinement, dilution, and rebranding. Chemists and apothecaries handle it with the language of progress, not ritual. It is weighed, measured, catalogued. Its danger is reframed as potency, its risks as dosage concerns. The field disappears. In its place stands the laboratory. Trade routes smooth the transition. Imperial networks carry the poppy's yield across oceans and borders, with the same efficiency used to transport tea, sugar, and spices. The substance becomes part of a larger system of global exchange, one that feeds the British household while keeping uncomfortable origins conveniently remote. What arrives is not a plant, but a product. Within England, the poppy is further softened. Its derivatives are blended, diluted, prepared in forms designed to reassure. Syrups, tinctures, milk infusions. The harshness is moderated until the substance no longer resembles anything wild or threatening. It becomes domestic. This transformation is crucial. A substance that still carries the marks of labor, blood, or empire would invite reflection, but poppy milk arrives smooth, pale, and mild. It looks like nourishment. It belongs in the kitchen, not the pharmacy. Its presence feels natural, even inevitable, nestled among staples that sustain daily life. Households rarely question how such a substance arrives so easily at their tables. The Victorian pantry is already a space where distant worlds converge: tea from China, sugar from the Caribbean, spices from India. Each carries a history of extraction and control, yet appears domesticated once shelved. Poppy milk simply joins this silent company. Servants warm it, mothers stir it, children drink it. None of them imagine the fields where it began, the hands that harvested it, the system that refined it into something acceptable for a Christmas evening. The substance's power lies partly in this erasure. Without origin, there is no story to question, no moral weight to carry. Doctors reinforce this separation. They speak of compounds, not crops, of effects, not sources. The poppy becomes an abstract contributor to health, severed from the soil that produced it. Science replaces story. Measurement replaces meaning. This distance makes reliance easier. When a substance feels as though it has always existed in its current form, its presence seems harmless. The pantry becomes the final stage of a long transformation, one that turns something potent and ancient into something familiar and safe. Yet the journey matters, even if it is ignored. The same processes that make poppy milk palatable also make it persistent. Once refined and distributed at scale, it is no longer a rare remedy. It is available, affordable, normalized. The infrastructure that brings it into homes ensures it will remain there. By the time a Victorian hostess pours a warm cup on a winter night, the field has vanished completely. Only the effect remains. The body responds, unaware of distance or history. It accepts what is given, trusting the systems that delivered it. From poppy field to pantry, the transformation is complete. What was once a plant rooted in earth becomes a quiet domestic presence, absorbed into routine. And in that final step, when something powerful becomes ordinary, the true groundwork for dependence is laid, unnoticed and unquestioned. Beneath shelves stocked with comforts the household believes it understands. Victorian London has a remarkable talent for ignoring what it does not wish to define. Names, after all, give shape to responsibility. They invite regulation, judgment, and consequence. A substance clearly identified as dangerous demands scrutiny. A habit clearly named invites intervention. But poppy milk exists in a comfortable ambiguity, never quite pinned down, never fully acknowledged for what it is. It is not spoken of as opium. That word carries weight, history, and unease. It evokes dens, smoke, moral collapse, and foreign vice. Nor is poppy milk openly discussed as a narcotic. Instead, it occupies a linguistic shadowland. It is referred to as calming, soothing, settling, a tonic, a bedtime aid. Language blunts its edges until it becomes unrecognizable as anything that might provoke concern. This vagueness is not accidental. Victorian medicine thrives on classification, yet it also understands the power of selective naming. To label poppy milk too precisely would invite questions about dosage, dependence, and propriety, questions that disrupt the smooth functioning of households already stretched thin. Ambiguity allows the practice to continue without friction. Doctors participate willingly in this silence. They describe effects rather than substances. They discuss symptoms rather than causes. A patient complains of restlessness, and the solution is offered without dwelling on what it contains. The focus remains on outcome: improved sleep, steadier nerves, restored composure. What matters is not what is taken, but that the patient can continue. Within families, this lack of a firm name creates a peculiar freedom. Without a label, there is no ritual of acknowledgement, no moment when one must admit to beginning something risky. Cups are filled without ceremony. The act feels incremental, harmless. One more night, one more spoonful. The absence of naming allows the habit to slip beneath awareness. Children, especially, grow up surrounded by this linguistic fog. They know the drink by its taste and effect, not by its origin. It becomes associated with bedtime, comfort, relief from overstimulation. No one explains it further. There is no story to attach to it, no cautionary tale. It simply exists. Even servants, who might recognize the substance more clearly, rarely speak of it. Their position does not invite inquiry. The household's practices are not theirs to question. Silence, once again, becomes the price of order. This unnamed status protects poppy milk from regulation as well. Laws cannot easily address what is not clearly defined. Apothecaries sell preparations under broad categories. Chemists adjust formulations without attracting attention. The substance flows through the city's medical and domestic systems without resistance, precisely because it lacks a stable identity. The result is a strange kind of invisibility. Poppy milk is everywhere, yet nowhere acknowledged. It is present in nurseries, bedrooms, parlors, sick rooms, yet rarely discussed beyond vague reassurance. This allows dependence to develop without recognition. There is no moment when society collectively decides to adopt it. There is only gradual acceptance, guided by comfort and necessity. What makes this especially effective is Victorian faith in moderation. The belief that anything taken in small, controlled amounts cannot be dangerous underpins much of the era's medical thinking. Without a name to signal risk, moderation feels sufficient protection. Few consider that repetition itself might accumulate power. Over time, the substance's anonymity becomes part of its charm. It does not carry the burden of expectation. It does not force the user to confront their reliance. It is simply there, ready to be used when the body resists sleep or the mind grows loud. Yet unnamed things often wield the greatest influence. Without definition, they slip past defenses. Without scrutiny, they shape behavior quietly. Poppy milk becomes a presence felt more than understood, a solution accepted rather than examined. In this way, Victorian London creates the perfect conditions for dependence, not through excess or recklessness, but through omission. By refusing to name the substance fully, the city frees itself from having to ask what it costs. And so the cups continue to be filled, night after night, with something no one quite calls what it truly is. Victorian medicine does not confine itself to hospitals and lecture halls. Its true power is exercised in drawing rooms, bedrooms, and nursery spaces, where authority must be gentle, persuasive, and reassuring. The physician who succeeds is not merely a man of science, but a figure of trust, invited across thresholds where illness is private and dignity must be preserved. These doctors learn early that the home is not a neutral environment. It is governed by unspoken rules, hierarchies, and anxieties. Any recommendation that disrupts domestic order is likely to be resisted. Bed rest threatens schedules. Withdrawal from society invites gossip. Radical treatments unsettle families who have invested deeply in appearing composed. The effective doctor adapts his medicine to the household, not the other way around. Thus, Victorian physicians become specialists in accommodation. They tailor remedies that allow life to continue uninterrupted. Poppy milk fits this role perfectly. It requires no dramatic intervention, no removal from routine. It does not challenge the authority of the household matron or the expectations placed upon her. Instead, it supports her ability to meet them. Doctors speak softly when recommending it. Their tone suggests prudence, not urgency. This is not a cure for disease, they explain, but an aid for modern strain. The nervous system, they say, has not evolved to withstand the pressures of contemporary life. Urban living, intellectual exertion, and constant social engagement tax the body beyond its natural limits. Chemical assistance becomes not indulgence, but adaptation. In this framing, the doctor positions himself as a guardian of balance. He is not introducing something new and dangerous. He is restoring what the world has taken away: sleep, calm, emotional steadiness. The patient is reassured that nothing improper is occurring. The treatment aligns with science, reason, and care. What is notable is how thoroughly these doctors embed themselves in domestic decision-making. They advise mothers on children's sleep. They counsel husbands on their wives' nerves. They instruct nurses on proper administration. In doing so, they extend medical authority into every corner of the home, shaping daily habits under the guise of health. Yet this authority is rarely questioned. The Victorian public places enormous faith in professional expertise, especially when it arrives dressed in moderation and civility. A doctor who warns too loudly risks being dismissed as alarmist. One who reassures is welcomed back. There are few incentives to reconsider a remedy that appears to work. Patients report improved sleep, emotional outbursts diminish, household tensions ease. From the doctor's perspective, these are successes. Medicine is judged by immediate effect, not by subtle long-term shifts in behavior or dependence. Moreover, the boundaries between physician and family often blur. Doctors are frequent visitors, trusted confidants, sometimes friends. Their recommendations carry personal weight. To question their advice would be to question the relationship itself. Even when doubts arise, they are often expressed obliquely. A doctor might suggest reducing the dose slightly or alternating nights. Rarely does he advocate complete cessation. To do so would risk unsettling a patient who relies on the remedy to function. Stability, once achieved, becomes the priority. In this way, Victorian doctors of the domestic sphere become unwitting custodians of dependence. Not through negligence or malice, but through alignment with cultural values that prize calm, continuity, and appearance over disruption. Their role is not to dismantle the system that exhausts their patients, but to help those patients endure it. The home remains orderly, the patients remain compliant, the doctor remains respected, and poppy milk continues to circulate quietly through domestic life, sanctioned by professional authority and sheltered by the belief that anything administered so gently, so reasonably, could never become a problem worth naming. Victorian medicine speaks of women in a language of delicacy. Their bodies are described as finely tuned instruments, easily disrupted by emotion, environment, and thought. Their minds are portrayed as receptive, impressionable, vulnerable to strain in ways men's minds are not believed to be. This framing is not presented as cruelty, but as care, a justification for protection, supervision, and intervention. From girlhood onward, women are taught that their bodies are predisposed to imbalance. Puberty, menstruation, marriage, pregnancy, mourning, all are treated as medical events, moments when stability might falter. The female nervous system, doctors warn, must be guarded carefully. Too much excitement invites hysteria. Too much grief invites collapse. Too much thought invites exhaustion. This belief shapes treatment profoundly. When a woman complains of restlessness, sadness, or fatigue, the response is rarely to reduce her burdens. Instead, her body is adjusted to better endure them. She is encouraged to calm herself, to regulate emotion, to avoid agitation. Chemical assistance fits neatly into this model. Poppy milk becomes an ideal solution precisely because it aligns with prevailing ideas about femininity. It is gentle, maternal, quiet. It does not force the body, it soothes it. Administered in small amounts, it promises to soften emotional extremes without threatening propriety. A woman made calmer is a woman made safer, both medically and socially. Doctors prescribe it readily for what they term female complaints: sleeplessness, anxiety, irritability, melancholy. The language is broad enough to encompass almost any discomfort that does not fit a clearer diagnosis. In this vagueness, poppy milk thrives. It becomes a universal response to distress that society prefers not to examine too closely. Women themselves are encouraged to accept this framing. To resist medication would suggest obstinacy or denial of one's natural limitations. To comply is to be sensible, cooperative, feminine. Many women internalize this logic deeply, coming to view their own discomfort as evidence of bodily weakness rather than a response to circumstance. Within the home, this dynamic reinforces dependency. A wife who relies on poppy milk to manage her nerves is praised for maintaining harmony. A mother who uses it to quiet her children is thanked for her efficiency. The substance becomes a tool of domestic order, smoothing emotional edges that might otherwise disrupt routine. Yet there is a cost to this constant softening. Feelings that might have signaled injustice or exhaustion are dulled before they can be articulated. Anger is quieted. Despair is muted. Even joy is tempered, lest it tip into overstimulation. The range of emotional expression narrows, leaving behind a calm that feels imposed rather than earned. Over time, the body adapts. What once provided relief becomes necessary for equilibrium. Nights without the drink feel sharper, more difficult. Emotions surge with unfamiliar force. The woman is told this proves the medicine's value, not her reliance. The solution, naturally, is continuation. This pattern reinforces the belief that female bodies require constant management. That stability must be maintained through intervention. That rest is not something to be granted freely, but something to be engineered chemically. Men, observing this process, rarely question it. The calm household benefits them as well. The absence of conflict, the smoothness of domestic life, the predictability of emotional tone, all are desirable outcomes. Few consider what has been surrendered to achieve them. Thus, poppy milk becomes entwined with gendered expectations. It is not merely a remedy, but a reinforcement of roles. Women are calmed rather than heard, adjusted rather than relieved. Their bodies become sites of regulation, their minds treated as fragile systems requiring constant correction. In this way, Victorian medicine does not simply respond to female distress, it shapes it. By framing women as inherently delicate, it creates conditions where sedation feels not only acceptable, but necessary. And within that necessity, dependence takes root quietly, shielded by the belief that fragility is natural and that calm, however achieved, is always preferable to unrest. In Victorian homes, a sleeping child is praised as a triumph of good upbringing. Silence at night signals order, discipline, and successful care. A child who settles quickly, who does not cry out, who remains still through the long winter hours, is spoken of with quiet pride. Restlessness, by contrast, is treated as inconvenience, something to be corrected rather than understood. Poppy milk enters childhood under this expectation of obedience. It is introduced not as medicine, but as kindness. A spoonful before bed, offered gently, framed as warmth against the cold or comfort after excitement. Christmas, with its lights, visitors, and disrupted routines, provides perfect justification. A child too stimulated to sleep is not seen as overwhelmed. They are seen as needing help to calm. Nurses and mothers administer the drink confidently. It has been recommended by doctors. It causes no immediate distress. Tears fade, limbs relax, breathing deepens. The child drifts into a sleep that appears peaceful, uninterrupted, exemplary. No cries echo down the corridor. No footsteps disturb the household. Adults rest easier, knowing the night will remain quiet. What makes poppy milk especially appealing for children is its predictability. Unlike scolding or restraint, it works reliably. It does not require patience or negotiation. It produces results quickly and without confrontation. In busy households, this efficiency is prized. The child's inner state becomes less relevant than the outcome. Over time, children learn the association instinctively. The taste of sweetness and warmth signals the end of the day. The body responds automatically. Sleep arrives not as a natural rhythm, but as a conditioned response. Nights without the drink feel strange, restless, exposed, difficult. The child may cry or resist sleep, prompting adults to interpret the behavior as proof of necessity rather than adaptation. Parents reassure themselves easily. The quantities are small. The child appears healthy. Growth continues. There is no visible harm. Compared to the dangers faced by children in poorer districts, hunger, disease, exposure, this seems negligible. Comfort is considered a moral good, especially when it keeps the household orderly. Yet, the sleep produced by poppy milk is not the same as unassisted rest. It is deeper, heavier, less responsive. Children may sleep through hunger, discomfort, even illness. Their dreams, if they remember them at all, are vague and muted. The natural cycles of fatigue and wakefulness are gently overridden. This matters more than anyone realizes. Sleep is where children process experience, emotion, fear, and wonder. When sleep becomes chemically imposed, those processes shift. Emotional responses dull. Sensitivity blunts. The child grows accustomed to calm that arrives from outside rather than within. By adolescence, some children struggle to sleep unaided. Nights feel too sharp, too noisy with thought. Restlessness is interpreted as nervous weakness, often inherited particularly in girls. The solution offered is familiar, comforting, already part of family practice. Another dose, a stronger preparation, a continuation of care. No one marks the moment when the child becomes a patient. The transition is seamless. The household has always used the remedy. There is no sense of escalation, only maintenance. What began as seasonal assistance becomes routine support. Victorian society rarely questions this process. A quiet child is a success. A calm household is a moral achievement. The long-term shaping of inner life remains invisible, overshadowed by immediate peace. Thus, children sleep too well, too deeply, too quietly. Their nights become smooth, uninterrupted stretches of chemical calm. And while adults celebrate the silence, something essential slips by unnoticed: the child's growing reliance on an external stillness, learned early, reinforced gently, and carried forward into a life that will later wonder why rest never comes naturally at all. Victorian medicine does not merely treat, it narrates. Every remedy arrives wrapped in words carefully chosen to disarm suspicion and invite trust. Language, in this era, functions as a sedative of its own softening meaning, dulling alarm and transforming power into reassurance. Nowhere is this more evident than in the vocabulary surrounding poppy milk. Doctors do not speak of narcotics in the home. They speak of calm, of settling the system, of quieting excitability. The nervous body is described as overtaxed by modern life, not harmed by it. What follows is not an intervention, but a correction, an adjustment, to bring the patient back into alignment with expectation. Words like soothing, gentle, and restorative appear again and again, repeated until they feel factual rather than persuasive. This language matters because it shapes how sensations are interpreted. A heaviness behind the eyes becomes relief. A muted emotional range becomes balance. The absence of urgency becomes health. Patients learn to describe their own experiences using the doctor's vocabulary, reinforcing the belief that what they feel is improvement rather than diminishment. To say, "I feel dulled," would sound ungrateful, even irrational. To say, "I feel calmer," is to speak correctly. Within households, the same lexicon spreads. Mothers reassure children that the drink will help them settle. Wives tell husbands it will take the edge off. Servants are instructed to warm it because it is good for the nerves. No one speaks of control, dependence, or loss. The words chosen preclude those ideas from forming fully. Even when symptoms emerge that might provoke concern, difficulty sleeping without the drink, irritability when it is delayed, a vague sense of detachment language steps in to reframe them. The patient is said to be run down, the nerves are overstimulated, the season is trying. Each explanation points outward, never toward the substance itself. Medical texts reinforce this deflection. They describe the nervous system as fragile and volatile, requiring management rather than inquiry. Treatments are praised for their ability to reduce symptoms, not for addressing causes. The goal is not understanding, but quiet. A calm patient is a successful outcome, regardless of how that calm is achieved. This linguistic strategy extends to dosage. Increases are described as adjustments. Regular use becomes maintenance. The line between occasional aid and habitual reliance blurs under a steady stream of gentle phrasing. There is no moment when a patient is told, "You are taking this too often." Instead, they hear, "Your system may require a little more support." What makes this language especially powerful is its moral neutrality. It does not accuse or shame, it reassures. It implies that needing assistance is reasonable, even responsible. To resist would suggest stubbornness or ignorance, a refusal to accept the realities of modern strain. Over time, this vocabulary becomes internalized. Patients begin to think of their own minds as systems requiring regulation. Emotional discomfort is interpreted as malfunction. Restlessness becomes pathology. The natural rhythms of feeling are reframed as problems to be solved rather than signals to be heeded. In this way, the language of soothing reshapes identity. People come to see themselves not as exhausted or constrained, but as nervously delicate, in need of ongoing adjustment. The substance that provides that adjustment is no longer foreign. It is part of the self's maintenance. By the time doubts surface, quiet, fleeting thoughts that something essential has been lost, the words to articulate those doubts are difficult to find. The language available insists that calm is good, that quiet is healthy, that smoothness is success. Any alternative feels reckless, even dangerous. Thus, the vocabulary persists, insulating the practice from scrutiny. It speaks softly and carries great influence. And under its gentle guidance, Victorian London continues to soothe itself into silence, convinced by its own words that nothing precious is being surrendered, only unnecessary discomfort, carefully named away. Measurement gives comfort to the Victorian mind. To measure is to control, to render the unpredictable orderly, to convert sensation into numbers that can be adjusted without fear. In medicine especially, measurement reassures both doctor and patient that nothing reckless is taking place. A remedy dispensed in drops feels fundamentally safer than one taken freely. Precision implies restraint. It suggests mastery. Poppy milk is often introduced this way, carefully portioned, discussed in terms of moderation. A teaspoon, perhaps two. A small cup, warmed gently. The quantities are spoken of with confidence, as though their exactness alone can prevent consequence. Doctors emphasize regularity and restraint, reinforcing the belief that danger arises only from excess, never from repetition. This belief proves remarkably durable. At first, the measured dose works exactly as promised. Sleep arrives more readily. Nights pass without interruption. The body relaxes into the expectation of rest. There is relief in this predictability, especially for those long accustomed to lying awake beneath ticking clocks and restless thought. The night becomes something to be endured less consciously. Over time, however, the body adapts. What once softened now merely steadies. The same dose produces less effect. Sleep comes later, lighter, more easily disturbed. The patient reports this to the doctor, not with alarm, but with polite disappointment. The remedy, after all, has been so helpful. The response is predictable. A slight adjustment is suggested. Another few drops. A second cup. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to restore the previous calm. The change feels minor, almost trivial, and yet it marks an important shift. Relief is no longer something that happens. It must now be maintained. This cycle repeats quietly. Each adjustment is justified by circumstance, seasonal strain, increased responsibility, emotional difficulty. The patient learns to anticipate the change, sometimes even suggesting it themselves. The language remains reassuring. This is not escalation, it is fine-tuning. Nights lengthen in winter, and with them, the reliance deepens. The dark stretches on, pressing against windows, encouraging introspection the culture does not welcome. Poppy milk fills the hours with sleep that feels earned, deserved. Without it, the night becomes hostile again, too long, too loud with thought. The contrast sharpens. What is rarely acknowledged is how this process erodes natural rhythms. Sleep no longer arises from fatigue alone, but from compliance with a ritual. The body waits for the signal. When it does not arrive, rest feels impossible. Insomnia, once intermittent, becomes persistent without chemical aid. Yet even this is framed as evidence of need rather than dependence. The patient is told their nerves are particularly sensitive, their constitution delicate. The remedy remains the answer. The alternative, enduring sleepless nights unaided, is considered unreasonable, even harmful. Endless nights thus become manageable only through repetition. Each evening follows the same pattern: warmth, sweetness, gradual dimming of awareness. The body submits willingly. The mind quiets. Sleep descends like a curtain drawn gently across consciousness. Morning brings functionality, if not vitality. The patient rises, attends to duties, presents themselves appropriately. There is little outward sign of reliance. Life continues smoothly enough to justify the means. The measured drops have done their work. What goes unnoticed is how the night has changed its meaning. It is no longer a space for dreaming freely or processing the day's residue. It is a problem to be solved efficiently, a span of time to be subdued rather than inhabited. As years pass, some patients find their nights extending further into dependence. The dose remains measured, but the need feels endless. The ritual cannot be skipped without consequence. Rest has been outsourced, entrusted to something external and precise. Victorian society rarely questions this arrangement. Measurement reassures. Doctors remain confident. Patients remain composed. The nights are quiet. And so the drops continue to fall, counted carefully, administered faithfully while the endless nights pass unnoticed. Transformed from natural intervals of rest into spaces managed chemically, one precise measure at a time. There is no clear moment when relief turns into expectation. No announcement, no crisis, no decisive shift that demands acknowledgement. Instead, the change arrives quietly, folded into habit, disguised as prudence. What was once taken in response to difficulty is now taken in anticipation of it. Victorian households rarely notice this transition because routine is the very fabric of respectability. At first, poppy milk is reserved for nights that feel unusually heavy, after travel, after grief, after particularly demanding days. Its presence is explained by circumstance. But as weeks pass into months, circumstances multiply. Life offers no shortage of reasons to reach for calm. Winter lingers, responsibilities grow, sleep remains fragile. The remedy's occasional use becomes frequent without anyone deciding it should. The cupboard where it is kept becomes familiar. The jug is warmed without deliberation. The cup is set out automatically, as much a part of the evening as closing the curtains or banking the fire. The body begins to expect this sequence. Muscles relax before the drink is even tasted. The mind anticipates quiet. Routine brings reassurance. There is comfort in knowing how the night will unfold. The predictability is prized in a culture that values order above all else. A household with smooth evenings is a successful household. A person who sleeps reliably is considered well managed. Few ask whether the reliability itself has been purchased at a cost. Conversation around the remedy fades almost entirely. No one remarks on its presence because it has ceased to feel notable. Guests may accept a cup, without realizing it differs from any other warm drink. Family members pour it for one another as an act of care, not concern. Its use signals attentiveness, not dependency. Doctors reinforce this normalization. When patients report taking the remedy nightly, there is rarely alarm. Instead, it is noted as part of their regimen. Regularity suggests stability. The doctor may inquire about effectiveness, perhaps adjust the dose slightly, but the practice itself is not questioned. Consistency is seen as responsible. This routinization alters perception profoundly. Relief is no longer a gift, it is an entitlement. Nights without the drink feel wrong, incomplete. Sleep that arrives naturally feels uncertain, unreliable, inferior. The body has learned to associate calm with chemistry, and anything else feels like deprivation. The emotional consequences are subtle but persistent. Moments of restlessness that might once have prompted reflection are now quickly silenced. Anxiety is treated before it can sharpen into clarity. Dissatisfaction is softened before it can demand change. Routine absorbs unrest the way thick curtains absorb sound. Even pleasure becomes regulated. Joy that might surge too brightly is dampened into something mild and acceptable. The household remains pleasant, never exuberant. Contentment replaces curiosity. Calm replaces engagement. These changes are gradual enough to escape notice, yet thorough enough to reshape daily life. What makes routine especially powerful is its moral cover. A habit shared by many appears innocent. When neighbors, friends, and relatives all engage in the same practice, it feels less like a choice and more like custom. To question it would seem eccentric, even ungrateful. After all, the practice works. People sleep. Evenings remain peaceful. Crises are avoided. But routine has a way of closing doors quietly. It reduces the range of possible experience until alternatives feel risky. Without the nightly calm, the world appears harsher than it once did. The mind resists returning to unassisted wakefulness. The body protests the absence. Thus, relief becomes maintenance. Maintenance becomes necessity. And necessity, when embedded in routine, becomes invisible. Victorian London excels at this kind of disappearance. It transforms powerful interventions into ordinary gestures, then forgets they were ever interventions at all. By the time dependence might be recognized, there is no language left to describe it, only the comforting certainty that this is how evenings have always been. And so the routine continues, unremarkable and unquestioned, while relief, once a response to strain, settles into permanence, shaping lives quietly, efficiently, and with the utmost respectability. In Victorian London, danger is expected to announce itself. Illness brings fever. Vice brings spectacle. Moral collapse leaves visible ruin. Society trusts its senses to identify threats, believing that anything truly harmful will declare itself loudly enough to be noticed. Poppy milk, however, offers no such announcement. It slips through this expectation effortlessly, leaving no alarm to sound, no warning to heed. There are no sudden breakdowns, no dramatic scenes to force recognition. Those who rely upon it do not stagger through the streets or abandon their duties. They rise each morning, dress carefully, attend engagements, and speak politely. The machinery of daily life continues to function, and in Victorian reasoning, functionality is proof of health. Doctors look for signs of misuse in the wrong places. They expect agitation, recklessness, visible decline. When these fail to appear, concern fades. Patients report sleeping better. Tempers remain even. Households appear calm. The absence of obvious harm is taken as evidence of safety. Even physical changes are subtle enough to escape suspicion. A persistent heaviness behind the eyes is blamed on winter. A dulling of appetite is attributed to nerves. A general flattening of emotion is praised as maturity or self-control. Each symptom finds a convenient explanation that does not implicate the remedy itself. This is what makes poppy milk uniquely insidious. It does not provoke crisis. It prevents it. It smooths over moments where strain might have surfaced, where exhaustion might have demanded rest, where dissatisfaction might have prompted change. By quieting discomfort early, it removes the very signals that would have prompted intervention. Families learn to trust this silence. When evenings pass without argument and nights unfold without interruption, the household feels successful. Parents measure their effectiveness by peace, not by vitality. Calm becomes the goal, not balance. The lack of visible struggle is mistaken for well-being. Medical authorities reinforce this illusion. Case studies favor outcomes that are immediate and observable. Long-term shifts in emotional depth or dependence are difficult to quantify, easy to dismiss. Without data to provoke concern, there is little incentive to reconsider established practice. The regulatory landscape reflects this complacency. Substances that cause public disorder attract scrutiny. Those that operate quietly within private homes do not. Poppy milk exists beyond the reach of moral panic precisely because it does not disturb the public order. It reinforces it. This lack of warning reshapes how harm is understood. Victorian society becomes accustomed to equating danger with disruption. If no disruption occurs, danger is assumed absent. The idea that harm might accumulate invisibly, shaping lives without spectacle, feels abstract and unlikely. Individuals internalize this reasoning. When doubts arise, fleeting thoughts that something essential feels muted, they are quickly dismissed. There is no external evidence to support concern. Friends and neighbors follow the same routine without complaint. Doctors offer reassurance. The discomfort seems personal, even irrational. Without alarms, there is no urgency. Without warnings, there is no call to action. The habit continues unchallenged, protected by its own effectiveness. People sleep, houses remain orderly, society hums along smoothly. What no one measures is what has been traded away to achieve this smoothness. The subtle loss of emotional resilience, the erosion of natural rhythms, the growing inability to tolerate unrest without chemical aid. These changes leave no mark dramatic enough to demand attention. Thus, poppy milk occupies a space beyond suspicion. It is not defended aggressively because it is never accused. It is not regulated because it does not provoke fear. It simply exists, doing its quiet work beneath notice. In a culture that listens only for loud danger, silence becomes its own kind of camouflage, and within that silence, Victorian London learns to ignore the absence of warning signs, trusting that what causes no immediate disturbance must surely be safe, never realizing that the most profound transformations often arrive without a sound at all. For a time, the arrangement seems perfect. Nights are predictable. Mornings arrive without panic. The sharp edges of living have been rounded into something manageable. Victorian households congratulate themselves quietly on having found a solution that offends no rule and disturbs no order. Calm, once elusive, appears secured. But calm, when manufactured, carries a flaw. It must be maintained. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, cracks begin to form. The remedy that once settled the body now merely steadies it. Sleep arrives later, lighter, less complete. The same measured dose that once ushered in deep rest now produces a restless half-sleep filled with shallow dreams and frequent waking. The body, having learned the pattern, resists its own sedation. This change is subtle enough to be dismissed at first. A bad night is blamed on the weather, on a troubling letter, on an overstimulating evening. No one suspects the remedy itself. After all, it has worked so well for so long, doubt feels ungrateful. The response is predictable, a slight increase, an additional cup, a stronger preparation recommended quietly by the chemist. These adjustments are framed not as escalation, but as necessary refinement. The goal remains the same: restore the calm that once came so easily. Yet with each adjustment, the calm becomes more fragile. It must be pursued deliberately now, rather than arriving naturally. Without intervention, the mind grows loud again. Thoughts race. Emotions return with uncomfortable clarity. The contrast between medicated stillness and unassisted awareness feels unbearable. What was once normal now feels like distress. This is the moment Victorian society struggles to interpret. The return of sensation is mistaken for illness. The nervous system, doctors suggest, has grown more sensitive. The patient is told they require ongoing support. The remedy remains the answer, even as it loses effectiveness. Some households notice other changes: a persistent lethargy during the day, a lack of interest in activities once enjoyed, conversations that feel hollow, repetitive, laughter that arrives late and fades quickly. These shifts are not dramatic enough to alarm, but they accumulate quietly, leaving a sense that something essential has thinned. Women, in particular, are told this dullness is a natural evolution of temperament. Men are assured it is the price of responsibility. Children are described as well-behaved, even when their quiet feels excessive. Each explanation protects the practice from scrutiny. What is rarely acknowledged is that the calm has become brittle. It depends entirely on continued intervention. Missed doses result in agitation, irritability, or sleeplessness that feels sharper than anything experienced before the habit formed. The body protests loudly, not because it is ill, but because it has adapted. This dependency reveals itself not through collapse, but through fear. Fear of nights without the drink, fear of emotions returning unfiltered, fear of losing the fragile order that has been so carefully constructed. The calm, once a gift, now feels like a requirement for survival. Victorian culture has little patience for this fear. It offers no language to describe it compassionately. Instead, it doubles down on the existing solution. If calm is slipping away, more effort must be made to secure it. More precision, more consistency, more control. But control has its limits. The body continues to adapt. The mind resists further quieting. The calm becomes harder to achieve and easier to lose. What once felt like peace now feels like maintenance of an illusion. This is the quiet turning point, the moment when relief no longer restores, but merely prevents collapse. When the absence of distress becomes the only measurable success. When calm, once desired, becomes something to be defended against the threat of its own disappearance. A calm that could not last does not announce its failure dramatically. It fades, leaving behind a deeper unrest than before. And Victorian London, having invested so heavily in silence, is ill-equipped to face what happens when that silence can no longer be sustained. The Christmas table in a Victorian home is a carefully constructed theatre. It bears abundance meant to reassure, order meant to instruct, and warmth meant to persuade the spirit that all is well. Silver glints beneath gaslight. Linen is pressed smooth as promise. Dishes arrive in deliberate sequence, each one signaling prosperity, continuity, control. The table does not merely feed, it performs. Around it gather the season's expectations. Family members who do not quite understand one another, guests who must be pleased, old grievances politely silenced beneath conversation, and carved meat. The Christmas table asks much of those seated at it: patience, cheer, restraint. It asks them to endure proximity without confession, to speak without saying what presses hardest, to smile while managing the invisible labor of harmony. It is here, amid the clink of cutlery and the soft murmur of approval, that poppy milk completes its transformation into tradition. It may appear as a final course, warmed and sweetened, offered as a kindness to settle the stomach after rich food, or it may be poured quietly beforehand, a preparatory measure taken in the privacy of a side room, just enough to smooth the nerves before facing the table's demands. Its placement is flexible, its purpose is not. It ensures that the evening unfolds without incident. Hosts rely upon it. They have learned, perhaps without admitting it even to themselves, that a softened household is an easier one to manage. The drink lowers voices, lengthens, pauses, encourages acquiescence. Disagreements dissolve before they can take shape. Guests who might otherwise linger too long over grievances drift instead into pleasant quiet. The table becomes calmer, more orderly, more successful. What makes this especially effective is how easily it blends into ritual. Christmas already invites indulgence under the banner of generosity. Extra courses, sweet wines, late hours, all are permitted for the sake of tradition. Poppy milk slips into this allowance without friction. It feels seasonal, appropriate, even benevolent. Who would begrudge a little extra comfort at Christmas? Children, wide-eyed with excitement, are soothed before impatience can curdle into tears. Elders, weary from travel and memory alike, find their aches softened, their thoughts slowed to a manageable pace. Women tasked with maintaining the evening's flow feel their shoulders loosen, their expressions steady. Men sit back more easily, content to observe rather than direct. The table settles into a collective rhythm of quiet compliance. From the outside, this appears as familial peace. Visitors remark upon the household's tranquility, its evident good management. Compliments are exchanged. Pride swells gently. No one remarks on how much effort, chemical and otherwise, has gone into producing this effect. The Christmas table becomes a proving ground. Each successful evening reinforces the belief that calm can be engineered, that harmony is something one can pour and serve. The memory lingers long after the plates are cleared. Next year, the same solution will be employed, perhaps with greater confidence, perhaps in slightly larger measure. What is lost in this process is difficult to articulate. The table still laughs, but laughter has changed its tone. Conversations still occur, but they circle safely, never touching what lies beneath. The gathering is peaceful, yet strangely hollow. The fullness of expression that might have accompanied unguarded joy or honest conflict has been replaced by something thinner, more controlled. Yet Victorian society values this thinning. Depth invites disorder, strong feeling risks exposure. The Christmas table is meant to reassure, not to reveal. In this context, poppy milk feels like an ally, one that helps tradition fulfill its purpose. By the end of the evening, as candles gutter low and chairs are pushed back, the household congratulates itself on another Christmas done properly. No arguments, no tears, no scenes. The table has held. What no one acknowledges is how much of the evening's success depended on quieting the very humanity the celebration is meant to honor. The Christmas table stands cleared and shining, a testament to order preserved, while beneath its polished surface, the season's chemical comfort takes another step toward becoming inseparable from the ritual itself. In Victorian society, the act of hosting is as much performance as hospitality. A hostess must anticipate every need, smooth every tension, and maintain an unwavering air of composure. The drawing room becomes a stage, the dinner table a set, and each gesture, pouring tea, offering a plate, adjusting a cushion, must appear effortless. To falter is to invite scrutiny, to show fatigue or frustration is to breach decorum. Yet the demands are relentless, particularly during the Christmas season, when gatherings stretch late into the evening and expectations multiply with every guest. For those tasked with this performance, relief must be both subtle and reliable. Poppy milk arrives as the perfect assistant. Its presence is unremarkable, yet its effects are profound. One sip brings warmth into the body, softens the mind, and steadies the nerves. Should a moment of tension arise, a child's complaint, a relative's sharp word, the hostess can endure it with measured patience, her composure intact. Her gestures remain fluid, her smile unbroken. The house continues to hum with propriety, as if all were natural and effortless. This quiet support is particularly necessary for women whose social standing depends on perception. A hostess cannot rest visibly, cannot allow a trace of impatience to escape, cannot acknowledge that maintaining harmony requires constant vigilance. Each guest evaluates not merely the quality of entertainment, but the hostess herself. Her nerves are her currency, her calm a demonstration of moral and social worth. Any sign of disruption reflects poorly on her, suggesting failure where none is permissible. Poppy milk, administered with discretion, allows her to meet these expectations without exposing the strain beneath. It is consumed in small measures, timed to coincide with the moments when the evening demands the greatest grace. The warmth of the cup is mirrored in the quiet expansion of composure, the mind steadied against the subtle pressures that would otherwise provoke agitation. The body does not rebel, it accepts the intervention willingly. Yet the efficacy of this aid extends beyond the individual. The household itself becomes more manageable. Servants move with less direction needed, anticipating tasks without repeated instruction. Children, soothed by the same draught or by its modeled effects, remain calm and compliant. Guests find the atmosphere untroubled, free from discord or exhaustion that might otherwise betray the effort expended behind the scenes. Harmony, once elusive, now appears natural. Over time, the hostess internalizes this effect. She comes to rely on it preemptively, drinking before guests arrive, anticipating the evening's strains in advance. Relief becomes routine, as unremarkable as pouring the first cup of tea. The chemical support is woven into the fabric of her performance so seamlessly that its presence is neither questioned nor acknowledged. It is simply part of the expected order of hospitality. Yet beneath this calm lies a subtle consequence. Emotional responsiveness, once genuine, is muted. Reactions are measured, even to the point of flattening experience. The mind perceives the evening as smooth, the body as settled, but the richness of engagement, its sharpness, its spontaneity, is subdued. Guests may leave impressed, yet none perceive what has been sacrificed to achieve the perfection of appearance. In this way, hosting without feeling becomes not merely a matter of propriety, but a practice enforced chemically. Poppy milk ensures that the household performs flawlessly, that the hostess maintains dignity, and that social rituals proceed uninterrupted. The cost, hidden beneath polite conversation and polished gestures, is rarely considered. Emotional depth is traded for calm, authenticity for composure, and the very essence of lived experience is shaped quietly, invisibly, in service of social expectation. By the end of the evening, as guests depart and chairs are returned to their places, the house exhales in relief. The performance has succeeded, harmony has been maintained. The hostess, still seated, reflects briefly on the ease with which she has endured a calm that feels earned, though in truth it has been aided by the invisible hand of chemical intervention. And as the fire flickers low, she knows that tomorrow the same performance will be required again, and the same quiet support will be welcomed without question. Grief in Victorian society is never wholly private, yet it is rarely expressed openly. Mourning is prescribed, ritualized, and bound by layers of social expectation. Black crepe drapes, cuffs of lace, and the appropriate somber attire serve as outward signs of loss, but they do little to soothe the inward ache. The heart, the mind, the body, these remain ungoverned by etiquette. Yet etiquette demands that sorrow be contained, neat, and non-disruptive. To collapse into despair is to violate propriety. To display anguish beyond what is prescribed is to shame oneself and unsettle others. It is here that poppy milk finds its most intimate utility. In households where loss has touched a member, the draught is offered discreetly, often without remark, in the quiet moments between the duties of daily life. The warmth of the milk, the subtle sweetness, and the opiate trace combine to blunt the sharp edges of pain. Grief, once raw and intrusive, is softened into something manageable, almost gentle. Tears may still fall, but they are slower, less wrenching, less likely to disturb the rhythms of a home that must continue functioning, despite loss. Mothers administering the drink to children who have lost siblings or playmates find their anxieties eased. The child sleeps, though more deeply than nature intended, allowing both body and mind to rest from relentless sorrow. Fathers, stoic by instruction if not by inclination, sip quietly in study rooms, feeling the tension in their shoulders ease without the necessity of confession or conversation. Wives, widowed or bereaved, accept it as a companion in sleepless nights, a mediator between the weight of memory and the necessity of mourning obligations. Victorian culture prizes composure, and poppy milk enforces it elegantly. The household may remain orderly, even as grief lingers beneath polished surfaces. Conversations continue, laughter returns in soft echoes, and the demands of society are met with measured attentiveness. The external performance remains intact, while internally the chemical aid blunts sensation, offering a shield against the piercing reality of loss. Medical authorities encourage such intervention, framing it as support rather than indulgence. Doctors recommend it for nervous agitation, melancholia, or seasonal depression, applying terms that translate private grief into observable, manageable symptoms. In doing so, they lend legitimacy to what might otherwise feel like compromise, the use of a substance to quiet the natural responses of the heart. Yet the effect is not neutral. The softened sorrow is easier to endure, but it also delays reckoning. Grief that is blunted chemically does not vanish. It accumulates beneath the surface, shaping emotional responses and memories. The bereaved may find themselves startled by sudden surges of emotion, by nights when the familiar draught is unavailable, or by moments when the mind recalls what the body has been trained to suppress. The chemical intervention teaches the nervous system to rely on external assistance, subtly reshaping the interior landscape. Servants and observers note the effect without fully understanding it. They witness calmer households, children sleeping through the long hours of darkness, parents attending to their duties with measured patience. They remark on the efficacy, praising the care provided. Few reflect on the long-term transformation, the gradual dependence on a substance that quietly moderates the most private of human experiences. In this manner, grief itself is managed into civility. Poppy milk becomes both buffer and bridge, softening the blow of loss while preserving the social appearance of order. The pain is never eradicated. It is merely mediated, translated into a gentler rhythm that aligns with expectations. And in the shadowed parlours and lamplit bedrooms of Victorian London, sorrow passes with fewer echoes, leaving a calm that is at once comforting, controlled, and quietly incomplete. In the tightly ordered parlours of Victorian London, domestic life is a negotiation conducted in silence as often as in speech. Husbands and wives occupy defined roles, circumscribed by expectation and social precedent. The husband manages the household's external affairs, attends to business, and ensures the family's security in the public eye. The wife maintains internal harmony, supervises servants, orchestrates social gatherings, and preserves the emotional atmosphere of the home. Together, they are expected to produce an image of composure that conceals the strain and fatigue of daily life. Poppy milk becomes a tool in this domestic symphony, and its use requires an unspoken agreement, a tacit consent between husband and wife. Its administration is rarely discussed in explicit terms. It is offered as part of routine, a gesture of care, or a practical measure to preserve composure. The husband may encourage it for his wife, noting the fatigue in her shoulders or the tension in her hands, while she accepts it as a normal extension of her duties necessary to sustain the performance expected of her. The act is delicate. To refuse would be to challenge not merely the substance, but the unspoken hierarchy it supports. To accept is to participate in a carefully structured domestic contract. Each cup, each spoonful, is a negotiation of authority, trust, and social expectation. The wife consents quietly, trusting her husband's judgment and the guidance of medical authorities, while the husband relies upon her acceptance to maintain order and decorum. The effect of this quiet consent is profound. In evenings that stretch long into winter, with guests to entertain and children to soothe, the substance ensures that emotion is tempered, nerves are steadied, and fatigue does not fracture composure. A mother's hands remain steady as she pours tea, her laughter measured and polite. A wife seated at the piano plays without agitation, her fingers untroubled by tension. The household functions smoothly, and the marriage appears harmonious, an image more carefully cultivated than spontaneously achieved. This ritual is reinforced by the prevailing moral framework. Victorian society praises restraint, self-discipline, and emotional moderation. The use of chemical assistance is framed not as indulgence, but as stewardship, a responsible measure to maintain virtue and harmony. In private, husbands and wives understand the dual benefit. The wife experiences relief from unrelenting pressure. The husband observes a household free from disruption. No words are exchanged. Consent is assumed, understood in the subtleties of gesture and timing. Children, too, are enveloped in this system. Observing the composure of their parents, they learn that calm is desirable, that suffering should be mitigated, and that chemical intervention is an acceptable tool to preserve propriety. Emotional modulation becomes normalized, extending the practice across generations. Yet beneath the smooth surface lies an unspoken complexity. Consent is quiet, but it is also conditional and constrained by expectation. The relief it provides is welcomed, but its necessity is internalized almost without reflection. Dependence grows imperceptibly, masked by the very civility that the substance enables. Both husband and wife come to rely on it not only to maintain composure, but to maintain the household's image, the veneer of control, and the illusion of effortless domestic grace. In this manner, poppy milk is woven into the intimate architecture of marriage. It becomes a shared understanding, a silent pact, and a stabilizing force. Relief is no longer merely physical, it is social, emotional, and moral. Through quiet consent, Victorian couples negotiate endurance, ensuring that the household functions, appearances are preserved, and the subtle machinery of domestic life continues unbroken, night after night. The calm, carefully engineered and silently agreed upon, becomes inseparable from the roles themselves, shaping marriage as much as the substance shapes the body. In Victorian London, the moral and spiritual order of the household is rarely left entirely to its inhabitants. Clergy, in their measured authority, occupy a quiet but persistent presence, offering guidance, consolation, and oversight. Ministers, vicars, and chaplains visit homes not only to counsel, but to observe, to affirm propriety, and to ensure that domestic life adheres to the era's strict codes of conduct. Their gaze is subtle, their advice discreet, and their influence profound, shaping behavior as effectively as any law or custom. Within this framework, poppy milk occupies an extraordinary space. It is neither condemned nor formally endorsed, yet it is tolerated as a practical aid for the preservation of peace. The substance smooths tempers, moderates nerves, and quiets emotional turbulence, all qualities the clergy implicitly support, even if they would never sanction indulgence openly. A household in which grief, fatigue, or agitation is chemically softened is easier to counsel, easier to observe, easier to consider morally sound. Calm households reflect well upon the spiritual order, suggesting virtue maintained without visible struggle. Clergy often provide the justification by emphasizing moderation. A minister may speak of the burdens of winter, of the strain that seasonal duties place upon nerves and spirit. He may note that the demands of social life, charity, and religious obligation require resilience beyond natural endurance. In such contexts, the discreet use of soothing draughts like poppy milk becomes intelligible, even commendable, as a tool to maintain composure and fulfill duties. Moral and chemical guidance, in this sense, converge. Households accept this tacit blessing willingly. Mothers pour the drink for their children or for themselves, interpreting it as reinforcement of propriety, a quiet partner in observance. Wives sip it to remain graceful at extended dinners, to smile through conversations that might otherwise provoke frustration or fatigue. Husbands offer it with the same instinct for maintenance, noting the relief it provides without challenging the social or spiritual hierarchy. The clergy need not enter the room, and yet their influence underwrites the practice. Relief, administered in this way, carries an aura of righteousness. No outburst disrupts family worship, no tears mar the carefully arranged parlor, no complaint escapes. The household functions as it should, and the spiritual observers directly or indirectly approve. In this quiet alliance, chemical intervention becomes a form of moral insurance, a safeguard against transgression, a tool for preserving the appearance of virtue. The subtlety of this arrangement is crucial. Poppy milk must remain invisible in its efficacy. If it were known, spoken of explicitly, or perceived as indulgence, it would invite moral scrutiny. Instead, its effects are folded seamlessly into routine. Calm is attributed to temperance, to upbringing, to piety. The drink itself disappears, leaving only the appearance of propriety intact. Yet the clergy, however discreet, also reinforce internalized expectations. Their emphasis on composure, duty, and obedience ensures that the household interprets chemical assistance not as a convenience, but as a necessary measure. Dependency is quietly sanctioned, internalized as virtue rather than compromise. Children and adults alike learn that moderation, calm, and endurance are expected, and that chemical aid is acceptable when it preserves these qualities. By Christmas, when houses are full of extended family, guests, and children excited beyond measure, poppy milk performs its most vital role. It protects the household's peace, it sustains decorum, and it shields all from moral observation. In this sense, the clergy and chemical intervention are allies, working together invisibly to maintain not only harmony, but the very image of virtue. The spiritual and the chemical converge quietly, stabilizing the household, insulating it from disorder, and ensuring that propriety, above all, remains unbroken. Winter in Victorian London stretches the day into a slow, deliberate procession. The sun, pale and low, struggles to reach the streets, leaving shadows long and dim across cobblestones and facades. Within homes of the upper classes, the afternoon is a measured interlude, a space between the completion of morning duties and the onset of evening obligations. It is a time that should invite rest, reflection, or gentle leisure, yet society demands that it be managed, observed, and productive. In these hours, the weight of expectation presses more subtly than it does under the bright glare of midday activity. Family members wander from fire to table, from reading desk to window, performing domestic rituals with quiet precision. Tea is prepared and poured with care. Letters are written with ink and patience. Children practice piano or study lessons under the supervision of governesses. Every movement is deliberate, every pause calculated. There is no chaos, yet there is a constant undercurrent of strain, a low hum of energy that must not falter. It is precisely in these long afternoons that poppy milk assumes its most unobtrusive role. The drink is prepared gently, warmed to a comforting temperature, sweetened to taste, and served in cups chosen to reflect both utility and refinement. It is presented as an accompaniment to quiet activity, a bolster against the subtle weariness that threatens to show. A spoonful for the child who grows restless mid-lesson, a sip for the wife whose hands are trembling with tension, a quiet draught for the husband whose thoughts threaten to sharpen into impatience. All are offered discreetly, as if natural and ordinary. The effect is immediate, yet understated. Muscles relax slightly. The eyes, previously restless with observation and expectation, settle. Voices soften. Conversations flow more evenly, without the abrupt peaks of agitation or fatigue that might betray the household's effort to maintain order. The body, lulled into compliance, mirrors the discipline of the mind, creating a seamless harmony that masks the effort beneath. This long winter afternoon, with its slow light and deliberate pace, becomes a stage on which chemical calm works invisibly. The household is neither intoxicated nor overtly subdued. It is simply manageable. Poppy milk preserves composure without spectacle, enabling continuity across hours that might otherwise invite impatience, distraction, or emotional display. It reinforces the prevailing notion that order is a moral as well as practical virtue. Mothers observe this carefully. The child who naps after a spoonful is not merely quiet but socially approved, peaceful, obedient, amenable to instruction. Wives recognize the stabilization in themselves, appreciating the brief reprieve that allows them to maintain grace for the remainder of the day. Husbands, observing the effect, experience relief as well. The household functions with minimal friction, and the long hours pass without dispute. Yet beneath this apparent tranquility, dependence quietly consolidates. The body begins to anticipate the effect. The mind comes to expect the ease, sleep, rest, or calm that might otherwise have arrived naturally now feels incomplete without the chemical reinforcement. Even the smallest omission is noticeable: slightly frayed nerves, shorter temper, restless movement. The pattern, established gently over weeks and months, has become internalized. The long winter afternoon, intended as a pause, becomes a proving ground. It tests the household's endurance and the subtle efficacy of chemical aid. What begins as comfort evolves into expectation, shaping not only the rhythms of the day but the habits of body and mind. Through these quiet hours, poppy milk asserts its influence, preserving order while slowly conditioning reliance, all under the guise of ordinary, necessary care. By the time dusk arrives, the afternoon has passed unnoticed, yet it has left a trace composure maintained, routines upheld, and the household quietly dependent on the calm that can be poured, measured, and sipped one small cup at a time. Night descends over Victorian London, bringing with it a darkness that presses against windows, muffles streets, and deepens the stillness within well-kept homes. In bedrooms, the weight of the day, the careful observation, the disciplined performance, the social obligations, met with practiced composure, settles heavily upon those who must rise early and maintain appearance. Sleep, for many, is neither spontaneous nor untroubled. It must be negotiated, coaxed, sometimes engineered. It is at this threshold of night that poppy milk demonstrates its subtle potency. Consumed as part of evening ritual, the pale, sweetened drink softens the body and steadies the mind, guiding both toward rest. Muscles relax, hearts slow, thoughts decrescendo into muted patterns of anticipation. The transition from wakefulness to sleep is rendered smooth, almost imperceptible, as though the household itself has exhaled in unison. But sleep induced in this manner is not ordinary. Dreams arrive altered, less vivid, less insistent, their shapes softened by the chemical presence that has entered the body. Nightmares are muted before they can begin. Anxieties that might have surfaced as restless motion or sudden waking are dulled to mere whispers. The mind is calmed, yes, but at a cost. The natural architecture of dreaming, with its capacity for processing, reflection, and emotion, is flattened. Memories, desires, and fears are buffered into gentle forms, leaving nights smoother, quieter, and strangely uniform. Children experience this first: the excitement of the day, the anticipation of gifts, the residual tension of lessons and correction, all are moderated by the drink. Dreams arrive later, but they are subdued. The child sleeps longer, more soundly, yet more passively, internalizing the association between comfort, chemical aid, and rest. The act of sleeping itself becomes conditioned, not a natural rhythm, but a ritual guided by intervention. Nights without the drink feel harsher, less forgiving, an experience that can provoke agitation and alarm. For adults, the effect is both practical and insidious. Wives, burdened by the expectations of hosting and household management, find relief in the deep, steady quiet. Grief, fatigue, and nervous tension are softened, allowing the evening and subsequent night to pass without visible fracture. Husbands observe with relief their own tensions eased by the household's collective calm. Yet, the inner landscape is altered. Emotional depth is muted, intuitive responsiveness dulled, and reflection, the kind that might lead to recognition or adjustment, postponed. This shaping of dreams and perception extends beyond mere convenience. Poppy milk teaches the body and mind that comfort arrives not organically, but through intervention. Emotional intensity, once a guide to decision or understanding, is dulled before it can act. Nighttime, traditionally a space for processing both day and self, becomes a managed interval, a controlled chamber where awareness is softened and affect flattened. The household awakens each morning functional, but subtly altered. Even medical authorities regard this effect with approval. Relief from restless sleep, reduction of anxious or excessive emotional expression, and maintenance of composure are all considered desirable outcomes. Few recognize, and even fewer acknowledge, the cumulative shaping of inner life that has occurred in the silent hours. Dependence is invisible, masked by calm, normalized by routine. Thus, dreams without shape are born. They arrive in palaces and parlors alike, drifting through rooms softened by candlelight, guided by sweetness and warmth, shaped by necessity and expectation. Sleep becomes a tool of order, and the nights, though peaceful, leave the household quietly transformed. Calm, it seems, has its own architecture, built not from rest alone, but from the gentle, measured intervention that ensures it remains uninterrupted, yet subtly reshapes those it sustains. In the lamplit parlours of Victorian London, harmony is a prized, almost sacred commodity. It is cultivated with care, maintained with vigilance, and celebrated as evidence of virtue and skill. The household that functions without discord is admired. The one that falters is quietly noted, corrected, or pitied. Yet the most remarkable harmonies are often those that are carefully manufactured, maintained not through natural accord, but through subtle manipulation and discreet intervention. Poppy milk serves as the ultimate instrument in this orchestration. Its pale warmth, subtly sweetened and carefully measured, quiets agitation, softens nerves, and smooths emotional edges. The laughter around the Christmas table is measured, but it arrives without the sharp notes of irritation or fatigue that might betray the effort expended to maintain it. Conversations flow with gentle predictability. Disputes dissolve before they fully manifest. Even grief and frustration, otherwise insistent, are softened into manageable murmurs. The illusion of harmony is most potent because it is largely invisible. Visitors to the household perceive nothing unusual. Chairs are arranged with care, fires glow steadily, and curtains are drawn with an air of unhurried grace. Guests complement the calm of the room, unaware that much of it has been chemically assisted. The subtle influence of poppy milk blends seamlessly with social expectation, creating an impression of effortless domestic grace. Women, who bear the brunt of sustaining this tranquility, find themselves aided both physically and psychologically. A sip of poppy milk steadies the hand as it arranges silver, smooths the voice as it directs servants, and softens the tension behind a courteous smile. The body, once tense from endless obligations, relaxes into a rhythm that mirrors the controlled pace of the household. The mind, previously racing with concerns of propriety, duty, and observation, settles into a muted attentiveness, able to manage tasks without visible strain. Men, observing these effects, interpret them as proof of good management rather than intervention. The composure of a wife or hostess reassures, suggesting that the household functions through skill and decorum alone. Children, too, are shaped by this quiet regulation. They learn that calm is desirable, expected, and normative. Emotional extremes are neither modeled nor tolerated. The household teaches restraint as much through observation as through chemical assistance. Yet beneath this carefully curated calm lies a quiet tension. Emotions are moderated before they can inform behavior. Reactions that might prompt conversation, reconciliation, or adjustment are muted. Affection, disagreement, grief, and excitement are all rendered less volatile, more controlled, and more socially acceptable. The harmony that visitors see is largely performative, a veneer that conceals the true state of experience within. Over time, the household internalizes this pattern. Relief becomes expectation. Calm becomes standard. Nights without the drink feel harsher, the weight of ordinary life sharper, the edges of human emotion more insistent. Dependence, subtle and unspoken, entwines itself with daily routine. The illusion of harmony is maintained precisely because the body and mind have come to rely upon it. Even clergy and medical authorities, who observe and advise, interpret the result as success. Households remain orderly, children sleep quietly, and social interactions unfold without disruption. The purpose of chemical aid is thus reinforced by the very approval it facilitates. Harmony is preserved, virtue is affirmed, appearances are flawless. And so the illusion persists, night after night, winter after winter. Candles burn low, teacups sit warm, and the household glides through its duties with a composure that seems effortless. Yet beneath the surface, beneath measured smiles and muted laughter, the subtle architecture of dependency continues to take shape, unseen, unremarked, and inseparable from the calm that the city so deeply values. In Victorian households, the movements of the upper class are rarely solitary. Behind every polished table and carefully arranged parlour stands a quiet army of servants, attending to details that ensure the household functions seamlessly. Their hands smooth linen, warm fires, replenish cups, and clear plates, all with a precision that renders their labour nearly invisible. They observe, listen, and interpret, noting subtleties that the family above might never acknowledge. In these shadows, the truth of the household often reveals itself in whispers. Poppy milk, administered discreetly to maintain composure, does not escape their notice. The servants understand its effects before it is ever named aloud. The slowed step of the hostess as she carries a tray, the softened voice of a wife giving instructions, the deep, untroubled sleep of a child after supper. They recognize the pattern, the ritual, the subtle chemical intervention that produces a calm which might otherwise have required effort or fortitude. In whispered conversation, the staff might speculate on its nature, discuss doses, remark upon its efficacy, all beneath the notice of those it serves. Yet these observations are tempered by the constraints of propriety and loyalty. Servants are bound to discretion by both fear and expectation. To comment aloud would risk censure, mistrust, or dismissal. Thus the whispers remain quiet. exchanged in the corridors, behind closed doors, or during the briefest moments of solitude. They serve as a private acknowledgement of the household's hidden scaffolding, an understanding of the machinery that keeps social performance intact. These whispers are often tinged with a mix of admiration and apprehension. On the one hand, the calm produced by poppy milk ensures that the household runs smoothly, making their duties easier, predictable, and less fraught with sudden crises. On the other, they recognize the subtle dependency it fosters, the way bodies have learned to rely upon it for order, sleep, and composure. They see how quickly the rhythm of life falters when the cup is delayed or absent, and how anxiety or agitation creeps back in, even for those who appear most composed. Servants also witness the ritualized care with which the drink is prepared and administered. The milk is warmed to just the right temperature, sweetened appropriately, and delivered in cups chosen to blend with social propriety. Timing is precise. Each sip, each spoonful, is calculated to maintain both calm and the appearance of normalcy. In observing this, the staff come to understand the household not merely as a domestic space, but as a carefully engineered theatre, where even natural human rhythms are moderated to preserve image and order. Children, too, are the focus of whispered attention. The staff notice how the youngest members of the household learn to associate calm and comfort with the taste and warmth of the milk. They watch as nerves are soothed before bedtime, as emotional storms are mitigated before they disrupt the household, and as dependence grows quietly, almost imperceptibly. In these moments, servants witness both the mercy and the subtle cost of chemical aid. Through these whispers, a hidden layer of understanding develops. The staff see what the family above cannot or will not acknowledge, that much of the household's tranquility, of its carefully maintained harmony, rests upon a substance that is invisible in effect, but pervasive in influence. Poppy milk shapes the behavior, the emotions, and the rhythms of the household as thoroughly as the hands of those who serve it. In this quiet awareness, servants become silent custodians of both order and secret knowledge. They move through the home, attentive to subtle cues, ensuring that the ritual continues uninterrupted. Their whispers, though muted, mark the presence of a truth largely invisible, that the calm and composure of Victorian society is as much manufactured in porcelain cups as it is maintained by etiquette, and that dependence, though discreet, runs through the household like a soft, persistent undercurrent. In Victorian London, the holiday season stretches beyond the confines of calendar days, folding into weeks of expectation, preparation, and performance. Christmas is more than a single celebration. It is a prolonged rehearsal of decorum, generosity, and composure. From the first glimmer of frost on window panes to the quiet retreat of Twelfth Night, households are engaged in continuous ritual hosting, attending, observing, and maintaining the delicate equilibrium of social order. The demands are unrelenting, and the strain is palpable even in the grandest homes. It is within this extended season that poppy milk achieves its most enduring influence. Initially introduced as a measure to ease the immediate tensions of a single evening, it becomes gradually indispensable. Each day, each gathering, each evening of conversation and duty requires continuity. The drink, administered discreetly, becomes a stabilizing force, ensuring that the household can navigate the relentless demands of expectation without visible fracture. Children, whose excitement is heightened by the novelty of gifts, decorations, and festivities, find their energy moderated. A spoonful before bed smooths over overstimulation, allowing them to sleep soundly, even when the evening has been filled with laughter, anticipation, and the occasional discord. Their rest becomes predictable, their mood stable, and their performance of obedience and charm seamless. Over time, these nights of chemically assisted calm form a rhythm that the household relies upon, creating an expectation that the holiday's demands will be met without disruption. Adults, too, internalize this pattern. Wives who must host, oversee, and perform find that the gentle sedation permits composure, even when fatigue presses heavily against the mind and body. Husbands, observing a household maintained in orderly harmony, accept its quiet efficacy without question. The chemical assistance is unspoken but understood, a private scaffold upon which social and domestic equilibrium rests. Even the staff, moving silently through corridors and service areas, recognize its presence and adjust their own efforts to its rhythm. The result is a household in which the holiday appears effortless. Conversations flow without discord, meals proceed without interruption, visits occur with polite patience. The outward signs of fatigue or emotional strain are absent, replaced by an almost unnatural calm that suggests mastery, competence, and grace. To the observer, the holiday season is a triumph of propriety, a flawless performance of Victorian domestic ideals. Yet, beneath this veneer lies the subtle truth of dependence. The calm that sustains composure is contingent upon continued administration. Even small lapses, delays in preparation, interruptions in routine, or a skipped dose reveal the fragility that has been masked by habit. The household's smooth functioning is maintained not solely by virtue or discipline, but by a gentle chemical intervention that has become integral to daily life. The relief that once felt optional is now quietly essential. In this way, the Victorian holiday transforms from a period of occasional celebration into a season of continuous management. The boundaries between ritual, necessity, and chemical reliance blur. What begins as comfort becomes a framework upon which the household's cohesion and performance depend. The season, in effect, never ends, not for the adults tasked with maintaining order, nor for the children whose repose has been trained to coincide with the subtle rhythms of the remedy. By Twelfth Night, when garlands are removed and decorations stored, the memory of continuous calm lingers. The house remains orderly, the family poised, the staff attentive. The practice has become habitual, internalized, and quietly expected. The holiday, though formally concluded, persists in routine and ritual, sustained by the very substance that first softened the edges of the season. In Victorian London, then, Christmas is never truly over. It extends as long as the calm it has engineered continues to be poured, measured, and trusted. There are nights in Victorian homes when the fire burns low, the windows are thick with frost, and the streets outside are silenced by snow. Within the quiet of well-kept bedrooms, the occupants, children, wives, husbands alike, slumber under blankets, their breathing even, their forms still. At first glance, the repose seems natural, unremarkable, and deeply proper. Yet beneath the polished surface of the household's calm lies the subtle influence of a draught that has long shaped sleep, controlled awareness, and moderated the body's natural rhythms. Poppy milk, administered with the care of ritual, achieves a profound depth of rest. The body, once restless with anticipation, anxiety, or grief, settles almost imperceptibly. Limbs relax, heartbeats slow, muscles lose their tension, folding the body into the bed with a pliancy that seems almost too complete. The mind softens alongside the flesh, thoughts dimmed without the need for conscious effort. Sleep arrives deeply, unbroken, and unobservant. For children, this deep rest is both a blessing and a subtle trap. The excitement of the day, the curiosity of youth, and the natural rhythm of night are all overridden by chemical calm. They sleep longer than nature intended, their dreams dulled, their imaginations muted. Parents take satisfaction in the ease with which the household has been managed, unaware that the very capacity for independent nocturnal awareness has been quietly reshaped. Nights without the draught, when they occur, are restless, disorienting, and uncomfortable, a stark contrast that reinforces reliance. Adults, too, experience the transformative effect of enforced repose. Wives tasked with overseeing social obligations, domestic management, and family harmony are rendered capable of enduring extended evenings with composure. Husbands, who may themselves be wearied from business, travel, or expectation, observe calm that allows for uninterrupted conversation and domestic efficiency. The boundaries between natural rest and chemically induced stillness blur, and the household moves as though it possesses an almost unnatural equilibrium. Yet this depth of sleep carries risks unrecognized by Victorian sensibilities. Bodies can become so acclimated to the draft that natural arousal, discomfort, or internal cues for awakening are blunted. A child might lie unresponsive for hours. A wife might awaken only partially to the day's responsibilities. A husband might drift through the night in a state of somnolent inertia. The household interprets this as efficiency, composure, or prudence. Few consider the possibility that vitality itself is compromised, that the senses have been dulled, or that the natural cycle of night and day has been reshaped chemically. Servants, ever observant, take note of these anomalies. They notice how limbs remain perfectly relaxed, how faces stay pale and undisturbed, how breathing retains a regularity that seems almost too precise. They exchange quiet glances, whispering to one another, yet never speak openly, bound by propriety and the unspoken contract of service. The household must appear flawless, and any acknowledgement of intervention threatens that delicate illusion. Doctors, when consulted, regard the deep slumber with approval. They note the reduction in agitation, the regularity of sleep patterns, and the apparent health of the patients. Little attention is paid to the subtle modifications of consciousness or the long-term consequences of nightly dependence. The effectiveness of the draft reinforces trust, both in the household and in the continued use of the remedy. Thus, bodies that would not wake become emblematic of the era's quiet, controlled domestic life. Sleep, which might have been spontaneous, reflective, or unpredictable, is rendered obedient. Consciousness is moderated. Dependence is cultivated, and the household continues to function with an ease that seems natural, unremarkable, and entirely proper. Yet beneath the polished calm, the profound influence of chemical aid leaves traces that are invisible to the eye, but indelibly etched upon the rhythms of mind and body. In Victorian households, reliance is rarely acknowledged. It is seldom named, for naming carries weight, the weight of recognition, of moral judgment, of responsibility. To admit dependence is to confront vulnerability, and in a society that prizes composure, order, and self-command, vulnerability is a liability. Yet, quietly and imperceptibly, dependence forms insidious, unremarked, and often celebrated under the guise of propriety. Poppy milk, consumed nightly or as needed, becomes the instrument through which this transformation occurs. At first, its use is rationalized as temporary, conditional upon circumstance. A child struggles to sleep. A wife is fatigued from the demands of hosting. A husband's mind is restless after a day of letters and business. In these moments, the draft is offered as a remedy, a gentle support, an aid to meet the immediate pressures of domestic life. There is no thought of long-term reliance, no concern that what soothes today may subtly shape tomorrow. But days turn to weeks, weeks to months, and the use becomes routine. The body learns to anticipate the calm. The mind grows accustomed to the dulled edges of emotion, and the household begins to measure nights, not by the natural ebb and flow of fatigue, but by the presence or absence of chemical assistance. What began as comfort becomes expectation. What was once optional becomes habitual, woven seamlessly into the rhythms of daily life. The absence of a name for this dependence makes it easier to accept. It is not labeled as addiction, nor framed as moral failing. It is merely the continuation of a practice that has always been performed in service of order, propriety, and well-being. Mothers pour it for children without comment. Wives take it quietly, noting only its soothing effect. Husbands encourage its use, reassured by the visible calm it produces. In every instance, the substance is framed as natural, reasonable, and morally neutral. Even within the household, the boundaries of awareness blur. Individuals who might notice subtle changes in temperament, responsiveness, or sleep patterns often interpret them as ordinary variation, fatigue, or seasonal strain. They attribute calm to good management, deep sleep to virtue, and the steady functioning of the home to diligence. Few connect these outcomes to the draft itself, and even fewer articulate the possibility that reliance has taken root. Medical authority, too, reinforces this perception. Doctors praise its effects: improved sleep, reduced agitation, stabilized nerves. They observe composure without scrutinizing the subtle shaping of consciousness that accompanies repeated use. Clinical language, restorative, nervine, soothing, validates the practice while leaving dependence unexamined. In effect, the household's reliance is both normalized and sanctified. Servants, who move quietly through corridors and rooms, notice the pattern more clearly. They see how behavior shifts when the draft is delayed, when preparation is imperfect, when doses are missed. Yet they speak only in whispers, careful to maintain discretion. Observing without acknowledgement, they become custodians of a secret, silently ensuring that the rhythm of use continues uninterrupted. Dependence without a name is, in this sense, both invisible and absolute. It shapes the household's tempo, the individual's experience, and the very perception of calm. It leaves no outward trace of disorder, no scandal to provoke scrutiny, and no language with which to confront it. The family continues to function seamlessly, unaware that the stability they prize is now bound to the very draft that appears innocuous, mild, and wholly necessary. Thus, Victorian London cultivates reliance quietly, insidiously, and without ceremony. What begins as temporary relief settles into permanence. The household drinks, sleeps, and performs with ease, never acknowledging that the calm so deeply valued has come at the subtle expense of autonomy, spontaneity, and the natural rhythms of mind and body. Dependence exists, yet it is nameless, seamless, and almost invisible, woven into the very fabric of domestic life. Even in the most meticulously ordered households, doubt eventually finds its way through the cracks, arriving slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the winter light that slips beneath heavy curtains. Victorian medicine, though confident in its classifications and prescriptions, is not immune to uncertainty. Doctors who once praised the calm produced by poppy milk begin to notice subtle patterns. Restless nights, when doses are delayed, increased irritability despite continued administration, faint complaints of heaviness or dulled sensation. These anomalies are small, easy to dismiss, yet they plant seeds of hesitation. At first, doubt is expressed cautiously. Physicians frame their observations in terms of sensitivity, constitution, or seasonal strain. Perhaps the patient's nerves are more delicate than usual. Perhaps the household is experiencing exceptional pressures. The chemical is not yet questioned, rather, the context is adjusted. The effect of the draft is still seen as largely beneficial, a support for an era that demands composure, order, and social diligence. Yet the signs persist. Children who once slept lightly begin to stir uneasily when the draft is withheld. Wives who relied on it for calm notice a dulling of vitality, a flattening of energy that is unmistakable. Husbands, attuned to the rhythms of the household, perceive an unfamiliar rigidity, a mechanical quality to behavior that was once fluid. These observations cannot be entirely ignored. and the first whispers of caution begin to circulate among both medical and domestic circles. Doctors, trained to value outcomes above subtlety, are torn. On one hand, the household functions with remarkable efficiency. Peace is maintained. Emotional storms are softened. Families navigate the social calendar with calm and precision. On the other, the long-term shaping of behavior, the gradual reliance upon a substance, and the diminishment of natural response cannot be measured as readily. How does one quantify the alteration of instinct, the blunting of feeling, or the subtle recalibration of mind and body? Advice begins to shift, though cautiously. Physicians recommend slight reductions, alternate nights, or smaller doses. They frame this not as concern for dependence, but as fine-tuning, a safeguard against overstimulation or sedation. Yet even these minor adjustments reveal the degree to which the household has come to rely upon chemical intervention. Moments of unrest arise when the routine is disrupted, demonstrating the delicate balance that has been maintained for so long. Households themselves are largely unaware of the creeping doubt. The calm remains, at least on the surface, and appearances continue to satisfy societal expectations. Yet within private observation, some begin to perceive that the tranquility is contingent, not natural. The quiet that once felt effortless now seems fragile, maintained by habit and reinforcement rather than by innate equilibrium. Servants, ever attentive, notice these subtleties too. A child's restless stirring, a hostess's delayed response, a husband's unusually measured speech all hint that the calm may require intervention beyond what was initially offered. Whispers between staff carry hints of concern, though discretion prevents these observations from reaching the family overtly. The household remains undisturbed externally, yet the internal mechanics of dependence are slowly acknowledged in silence. By the end of these long winters, a new awareness emerges. Medical doubt has crept into conversations, framed as prudence rather than alarm. Yet, it is enough to suggest that the calm, so carefully cultivated, may be less absolute than previously believed. Victorian households, accustomed to seamless order, are beginning to glimpse that the tranquility they prize may rest upon fragile foundations maintained by a draft, measured meticulously, whose quiet power is both indispensable and subtly transformative. In the carefully regimented world of Victorian households, the subtle balance of calm maintained by poppy milk is rarely questioned until the body, acclimated to its effects, begins to demand more. The very measure that once produced ease now falters against the adaptation of the nervous system. What sufficed last winter, last month, or even last week is no longer sufficient. The household notices, if only faintly, that the draft requires adjustment to achieve the same gentle flattening of anxiety, tension, or wakefulness. The first response is often substitution. When the familiar cup no longer delivers its full effect, a slightly stronger preparation is introduced. A larger dose, sweeter, warmer, or combined with another mild sedative, enters the routine without fanfare. These modifications are justified to preserve function, maintain order, and avoid the disruptions that could betray household composure. The rationale is simple: the body has changed, therefore the remedy must adapt. The process feels entirely reasonable to both household and physician. Escalation is subtle, incremental, and almost imperceptible. The child who once slept with a single teaspoon now requires 2. The hostess, whose hands trembled slightly during long afternoons, now accepts an additional cup before evening duties. The husband, whose nerves were soothed after letters and social obligations, finds his composure improved only with a slightly fortified preparation. Each step is small enough to avoid overt recognition, yet cumulative enough to shape behavior and expectation. Victorian households interpret these adjustments as prudence rather than dependence. They trust medical authority, rely on routine, and perceive the modifications as responses to circumstance, not as signals of adaptation or need. The veneer of propriety remains intact. Guests remain unaware of the subtle escalation. Children remain calm. The household continues to perform its social duties with precision and grace. Yet the consequences of substitution extend beyond mere dosing. The nervous system, trained to expect chemical assistance, begins to associate calm with intervention rather than innate regulation. Emotional thresholds shift. Sensitivity to natural fatigue diminishes. Nights without the draft become uncomfortable, even alarming. The household recognizes disruption not as a natural response to exhaustion or tension, but as a failure to maintain chemical equilibrium. Dependence, silent and gradual, is reinforced. Medical oversight provides justification. Physicians note that the adjustments are minor, that they align with seasonal stressors, and that the household continues to function without visible harm. They frame escalation as responsible stewardship, rather than as an acknowledgement of growing reliance. Their language, careful, measured, reassuring, ensures that neither patient nor family perceives the broader pattern. That relief has become habitual, and habit has evolved into expectation. Servants observe these shifts with quiet understanding. They notice the increased preparation, the subtle ritual changes, the timing adjustments. They note the difference in the household's mood when doses are modified or delayed. Yet they speak only in whispers, bound by discretion and the unspoken hierarchy of observation. Their awareness of the household's evolving dependence is profound, though unarticulated. In this way, substitution and escalation become integral to domestic life. The calm, so carefully preserved, demands reinforcement. The illusion of effortless composure is maintained, yet it rests upon a foundation that has grown increasingly contingent. Victorian households, guided by propriety, habit, and medical authority, continue their performance, unaware that the very substance that ensures peace has begun to govern it. The holiday season, the long afternoons, the lamplit evenings all persist under a quiet chemical management whose escalation is both invisible and inexorable. Victorian society is remarkably attentive to appearances and scandal, yet it is equally capable of overlooking subtle, private deviations from propriety. Public outcry is reserved for visible transgression, a drunken outburst, an open argument, a breach of etiquette. Private habits, even those that shape behavior as profoundly as chemical reliance, often evade scrutiny entirely, particularly when they leave no outward trace. Poppy milk, administered quietly within the domestic sphere, thrives in this environment of selective attention. The household that relies upon it remains outwardly impeccable. Children sleep soundly through long winter nights. Guests encounter calm, orderly conversation. Meals proceed without incident. Emotional extremes are muted. Grief is softened, and the subtle tensions that might otherwise emerge in the drawing room are quelled before they can disrupt social performance. To the world outside, the home appears exemplary. To the household itself, the practice feels routine, even natural. Yet beneath this facade lies a tension that is rarely acknowledged. The calm is chemical, not spontaneous. Dependence has taken root without ceremony or recognition. The family relies upon it to maintain composure, to preserve appearances, and to fulfill obligations. Without it, evenings grow restless, voices become sharper, and fatigue presses too heavily upon the body. The calm, celebrated as virtue, is contingent upon the draught, and yet no one speaks its name. The contrast between public perception and private reality is striking. A household may be praised in the local gazette for its propriety, for the elegance of its Christmas gatherings, or for the composure of its children and adults alike. Visitors leave with the impression of harmony, never suspecting the invisible scaffolding upon which that harmony rests. Poppy milk, taken as a routine, quietly shapes behavior without announcing its presence. Its effects are praised as evidence of good management rather than recognized as intervention. Servants, however, perceive the subtle truth. They witness how quickly agitation returns when a dose is delayed, how the household's rhythm falters in its absence, and how dependence, though unspoken, guides the body and mind alike. Their whispers, exchanged in corridors and empty kitchens, carry knowledge that cannot be named openly. To reveal it would threaten the household's reputation, undermine authority, and risk censure. Their silence, like the calm itself, is deliberate and protective. Medical authorities, when consulted, often reinforce the illusion. Poppy milk is framed as restorative, mild, and appropriate for seasonal strain. Physicians praise the household's composure as evidence of efficacy. They measure success by observable calm and productivity, rarely considering the subtle shaping of consciousness or the gradual internalization of reliance. The absence of public signs of abuse ensures that scrutiny remains minimal and the private habit continues uninterrupted. This quiet negotiation between visibility and concealment allows households to maintain the veneer of perfection. Dependence is normalized in private, praised publicly as self-discipline. The very subtlety of the effect shields it from judgment. The family functions efficiently, social obligations are met, and society remains none the wiser. Yet, the tension persists beneath the surface. Calm is maintained only through vigilance, ritual, and chemical aid. The illusion of harmony, once established, requires ongoing reinforcement. Victorian households, skilled in performance and protective of reputation, navigate this duality with care. Public scandal is avoided entirely, while private reliance becomes absolute, unspoken, and indispensable. In this interplay, the era's obsession with appearance and propriety ensures that the quiet management of emotion and dependence continues, invisible, uninterrupted, and unquestioned. In Victorian London, innocence is a fragile commodity. It is preserved through discipline, ritual, and careful observation, yet it is rarely natural. Children grow under watchful eyes, guided by rules both spoken and unspoken, instructed in manners, morality, and the expectations of society. Their experiences, once wild and vivid, are gradually molded to fit the patterns deemed appropriate by household, school, and social circle. Yet even in the most carefully managed lives, something deeper is at stake, the subtle shaping of the mind and body by forces rarely acknowledged, silently eroding the natural capacity for spontaneity and unmediated feeling. Poppy milk, offered in measured doses to children and adults alike, becomes one of these shaping forces. What begins as occasional aid intended to calm nerves or soothe sleeplessness gradually embeds itself into routine. The child who once awoke, startled by dreams, now sleeps with predictable depth, untroubled by anxiety or excitement. The child who once expressed impatience or curiosity now learns that calm is expected, that compliance is rewarded, and that chemical assistance ensures both. The boundaries between guidance, nurture, and intervention blur. This process affects adults with equal subtlety. Wives, tasked with the dual labor of household management and social obligation, find their nerves quieted, their emotional edges softened. Husbands, observing composure and tranquility, reinforce the practice, valuing the stability it produces. Grief, frustration, and fatigue, all natural responses to the demands of life, are mediated chemically, gradually reconfigured as experiences to be endured with the aid of a draft rather than navigated through awareness and reflection. The decline of innocence is most apparent in the shaping of perception. Children and adults alike learn that rest, contentment, and calm are contingent upon intervention. Emotional extremes, once natural and informative, are now interpreted as inappropriate or undesirable. Joy is tempered, excitement subdued, sorrow softened. The household's appearance of harmony is maintained, but at the cost of spontaneous expression. Experience is no longer a guide to understanding, it is a condition to be managed. Even schooling, reading, and creative engagement are influenced. Children respond predictably to instruction, completing lessons with composure, yet their curiosity and imaginative spontaneity are subtly muted. Thought processes that might have diverged or challenged are smoothed into conformity. Observers, teachers, governesses, and parents note improved compliance and steadiness, praising it as evidence of effective nurture, unaware that chemical moderation underlies much of the apparent improvement. The household itself becomes an ecosystem of mediated experience. Each member adapts to the presence of the draft, its timing, its effect, its absence. The rhythm of day and night, work and leisure, play and reflection is gradually aligned with the chemical pattern. Dependence is neither dramatic nor visible. It is woven seamlessly into routine, reinforced by the repetition of ritual and expectation. Servants, always aware of the subtle shifts, perceive the quiet transformation. They witness the softening of energy, the reduction of spontaneity, the smooth functioning of the household achieved through chemical aid. They exchange whispers, noting the cumulative effect, yet they speak only in hushed tones, recognizing the social and moral imperatives that protect the practice. Thus, innocence declines without spectacle. What appears as calm, composure, and refinement masks a slow reconfiguration of experience. The child who once reacted freely, the adult who once felt deeply, are reshaped, guided toward compliance and stability. In Victorian London, this decline is celebrated rather than lamented, for the appearance of perfection is prized above the authenticity of feeling. By the end of the holiday season, as the last garlands are removed and fires burn low, the household has preserved order and propriety. Yet the subtle cost of chemical guidance, this quiet erosion of innocence, remains invisible, internalized, and inseparable from the calm that society so deeply values. There are evenings in Victorian households when the draft is absent, intentionally or by circumstance, and the effect is immediate, undeniable, and quietly alarming. The cup that has come to signal calm, order, and composure is missing, and with its absence comes the return of what has been dulled, softened, and deferred: tension, fatigue, unrest. In a culture that prizes uninterrupted decorum, these nights feel anomalous, even threatening. Children, conditioned over months or years to associate rest and comfort with the gentle sweetness of poppy milk, awaken restless. Their limbs stir beneath blankets, hands fidget, voices murmur complaints, and small anxieties grow into larger frustrations. Sleep that once arrived effortlessly is now elusive, uneven, and shallow. The household, so accustomed to quiet evenings, perceives this as disruption, a challenge to the careful equilibrium that has been cultivated. Adults, too, sense the difference immediately. Wives notice the return of tension in their shoulders, the quickened pulse beneath composure, and the subtle sharpening of thought that the draft had long subdued. Husbands observe irritability in themselves and in others, the unsteady rhythm of conversation, the faint restlessness that threatens to fracture polite interactions. Even the servants, trained to anticipate needs and smooth over disturbances, feel the strain, noticing that routine requires greater effort to maintain. The absence of the cup exposes the true extent of reliance. Calm, once assumed, is revealed to be contingent. The body, having learned to depend upon chemical reinforcement, protests its lack. Nights become longer, heavier, and more insistent. demanding attention and energy that the household is unaccustomed to giving. Sleep must now be coaxed through natural means, a practice neglected for months, perhaps years, and the mind resists, restless with the rhythms it has forgotten how to follow. This disruption carries both practical and emotional consequences. A child's agitation may awaken siblings, creating ripples through the household. A wife's fatigue, previously masked, manifests in subtle errors or lapses in attention. Husbands may become impatient or uneasy, struggling to sustain the same level of decorum expected of them. The household functions less smoothly, and the veneer of perfection so carefully cultivated falters, however briefly. Medical authority, when consulted, frames the experience as temporary. Doctors attribute the unrest to unusual strain, seasonal variation, or nervous sensitivity. They rarely consider that the absence of chemical aid has revealed a deeper dependence, a subtle restructuring of behavior and physiology. Advice may be given to restore the routine, and the cup is prepared again, its return celebrated quietly as though nothing unusual had occurred. Yet the lesson is unmistakable to those who notice. Calm is not innate, it is maintained. The appearance of composure and harmony is contingent upon the intervention that has shaped both body and mind. Nights without the cup reveal the fragility of the illusion, the degree to which domestic order has become inseparable from chemical assistance. Even as the household resumes its rhythms, the memory of disruption lingers. The quiet understanding passes between parents, between servants, between observers, that the cup is no mere comfort, but a necessity. The illusion of effortless calm is preserved, yet its absence reveals the invisible scaffolding upon which it rests. Thus, Christmas without the cup becomes a silent lesson, a demonstration of dependence, and a reminder that what seems natural, effortless, and proper in Victorian households is often carefully engineered, maintained, and inseparable from the very substance that has been quietly shaping them for months. The calm returns, but the knowledge of its fragility, though unspoken, settles into the household as surely as the winter frost outside. By the late Victorian era, the landscape of chemical aid in the household begins to shift. Poppy milk, once the undisputed source of calm and composure, encounters a growing array of alternatives. Medicines drawn from morphine, chloral, and other synthesized compounds that promise efficacy, speed, and precision. These new drugs arrive quietly, distributed through apothecaries, recommended by physicians, and gradually integrated into domestic routine, offering an expanded palette of influence over body and mind. Unlike poppy milk, which is sweetened, familiar, and tied to ritual, these new substances are sharper, more concentrated. They carry a clinical authority that appeals to Victorian confidence in science. Morphine, extracted and refined from the same family of plants as opium, is measured in exacting doses, its potency calculated with mathematical precision. Chloral, synthesized and colorless, is praised for its ability to induce sleep with minimal fuss. For households already acclimated to reliance on chemical calm, these new options represent both promise and peril. The introduction of these drugs is often framed as progress, an advancement of medical knowledge that improves upon older, natural remedies. Doctors highlight their efficiency, deeper sleep, faster relief from agitation, and the ability to manage more complex symptoms. They stress that, when used with care, these compounds offer precision that poppy milk could never achieve. For families accustomed to monitoring the effects of a spoonful of milk, the appeal of a faster, more potent solution is considerable. Yet the new drugs also escalate dependence. Morphine and chloral work more swiftly and forcefully, altering consciousness in ways that are more pronounced. The body acclimates rapidly, creating a need for regular administration that can exceed previous expectations. Households learn to schedule doses meticulously, to anticipate the timing of relief, and to measure the effects with attention that borders on ritual. The line between aid and necessity blurs more quickly than before. Children are introduced cautiously, often at the recommendation of physicians concerned with sleep or nervousness. The effect is unmistakable. Stillness arrives more quickly, sleep deepens, and restlessness fades almost immediately. The household interprets these changes as miraculous efficiency, rarely noting that dependence is forming more rapidly than with poppy milk. Adults experience similar effects, with the added risk that the subtle cues that once guided judgment, slight agitation, restlessness, minor irritability, are suppressed before they can signal the need for moderation. Servants observe these changes quietly, noting the difference in ritual and effect. The new compounds require precise measurement, careful timing, and subtle management of supply. They alter not only the body, but the rhythm of domestic life, shaping evenings, duties, and interactions with a more deliberate hand. Whispers circulate among staff about potency and dosage, about moments when the household seems unusually still or unusually detached, yet discretion prevents open discussion. The moral framing of these new drugs mirrors that of poppy milk. Relief is cast as responsible stewardship, efficiency, and prudence. Any discomfort, agitation, or fatigue is attributed to circumstance rather than reliance. The household continues to function, social obligations are met, and appearances remain impeccable. Yet beneath this polished exterior, dependence is now reinforced with greater potency, efficiency, and subtlety. Thus, the arrival of new drugs reshapes the domestic landscape. What began with a spoonful of milk evolves into a more potent, precise, and deeply ingrained system of chemical management. Victorian homes, already accustomed to the invisible influence of poppy milk, now confront the enhanced power and accelerated reliance of these synthesized compounds. Calm persists, order is maintained, and the illusion of effortless propriety continues, but the stakes have risen, and the foundation of tranquility grows increasingly contingent upon substances whose power is undeniable, yet largely unspoken. Even as the new drugs circulate quietly through Victorian households, replacing or supplementing the familiar draughts of poppy milk, a memory lingers in the minds of those who once relied upon simpler measures. It is the recollection of a gentler calm, one that arrived slowly and subtly, embedded in warmth and sweetness, rather than precise calculation and chemical potency. This memory, faint yet persistent, evokes both comfort and unease, a sense of what has been gained and what has been quietly surrendered. Parents recall evenings when a single cup of milk, warmed and sweetened, could soften the tensions of the household. Children would drift into sleep with a natural pliancy, their breaths evening without the urgency of measured dosing. The body and mind adjusted gradually, learning to anticipate relief while retaining the faint contours of natural response. Calm arrived not in abrupt silences or chemically induced sedation, but as a gentle modulation of awareness, a quiet hand guiding the household through long nights. Now, with morphine, chloral, and other synthesized compounds, that subtlety is largely absent. Relief arrives more swiftly, more decisively, and with an efficiency that borders on mechanical. The body is subdued, the mind softened, and the household functions with an order that seems impeccable, but the memory of what was poured away, the measured patience, the tactile intimacy of preparation, the gentle unfolding of calm remains as a whisper against the new, more immediate forms of control. Children, now acclimated to swifter, more potent draughts, lose the tactile association that once marked evening ritual. Sleep arrives on command, rather than through anticipation. Emotional intensity, curiosity, and spontaneous agitation are moderated before they can surface, leaving nights still and orderly, yet subtly impoverished. Parents notice the difference, though it is not always named. There is a sense that the household has become more efficient, yes, but also less human, less textured. less responsive to the quiet rhythms of life that once required neither calculation nor chemical precision. Even adults, who once found a measure of comfort in the simplicity of milk and sugar, sense the difference. The immediacy of chemical relief suppresses not only agitation, but reflection. Tensions, disappointments, and fatigue are muted before they can inform decision, insight, or empathy. The mind, trained to expect external modulation, grows dependent on it, losing touch with subtle cues that once guided action and perception. Calm persists, but at the cost of awareness. Servants, who have observed the evolution from milk to morphine, note these shifts acutely. They recognize that while order is maintained, the texture of domestic life has changed. There is less improvisation, less subtle negotiation of needs, and more reliance upon the predictable influence of chemicals. Whispers circulate in corridors, noting the steadiness, the smoothness, and the faint absence of natural variability that once marked evenings and nights. Remembering what was poured away is, therefore, both melancholy and instructive. It is a quiet acknowledgement that the pursuit of perfect calm, uninterrupted composure, and seamless social performance has been purchased at a subtle cost. The gentle shaping of consciousness, the modulation of emotional life, and the natural rhythm of responsiveness. Victorian households continue to function, maintain propriety, and meet expectation, yet beneath the lamplit glow of order lies the memory of evenings when calm arrived gradually, softly, and almost imperceptibly, a reminder of the humanity quietly sacrificed for the sake of appearance, comfort, and control. In this recollection, one recognizes both the ingenuity and the price of chemical management. Relief endures, appearances persist, and the household glides smoothly through its duties, but what was poured away remains faint, unspoken, and impossible to recover fully. The memory lingers, like the last traces of warmth in a porcelain cup, as the new era of chemical precision shapes life more decisively than ever before. As the final candles gutter low and the last of the evergreens are stripped from mantelpieces, Victorian households exhale a collective sigh. The formalities of Christmas visits, dinners, ceremonies, and gifts are complete. Guests have departed, children have returned to routine, and the household rests beneath the hush of evening. Yet, even as the season concludes, its presence lingers in ways less tangible than tinsel or ribbons. It whispers in the quiet of bedrooms, hums in the softened breaths of sleepers, and imprints upon minds and bodies shaped by weeks of careful management, chemical aid, and ritualized expectation. The draughts of poppy milk, morphine, and chloral, so integral to the household's composure throughout the season, leave traces far beyond their immediate effects. Sleep, deeply mediated, has conditioned nervous systems to anticipate external assistance. Calm, chemically reinforced, has sculpted emotional responses. The household, so meticulously controlled, appears serene and orderly to the casual observer. But beneath this apparent perfection, dependence and conditioning have taken root, subtle, silent, and enduring. Even the children, who awaken from their long, mediated nights with eyes bright and bodies seemingly refreshed, carry the imprint of chemical moderation. Their natural rhythms have been guided, their excitations tempered, and their response to fatigue reshaped. Play, study, and observation occur within a narrower emotional bandwidth than might have been possible before. Their innocence, already carefully protected and monitored, has been subtly constrained, smoothed into predictability by months of gentle intervention. Adults, too, bear the marks of the season's influence. Wives who maintained composure through extended gatherings, who directed households and soothed nerves, now rest under the illusion that natural calm has returned. Husbands, observing peace in the household and continuity in social obligations, perceive efficiency, order, and propriety. Yet these impressions are inseparable from the chemical scaffolding that has supported them for weeks. The mind, dulled to minor agitation, perceives less sharply. The body, trained for measured responses, moves with careful regularity. Servants, the quiet witnesses to these transformations, understand more than anyone might imagine. They notice the lingering effect of the draughts, the slight hesitation in movement when absent, the subtle weight in gestures that remain accustomed to chemical moderation. They exchange whispers in corridors, noting the seamless continuation of order, yet aware of the invisible scaffolding that ensures it persists. Their knowledge is silent, protective, and enduring, just like the calm itself. Even as the decorations are packed away, the memory of the season persists. The warmth of evenings by the fire, the ritual of measured sips, the quiet that accompanies carefully orchestrated gatherings all leave an imprint upon the household that is more than habitual. It is formative. The chemical assistance has trained the household to value calm, to anticipate relief, and to normalize dependence. The season, though formally concluded, continues in the rhythms it has instilled, in the expectations it has created, and in the subtle shaping of mind and body. Thus, Christmas in Victorian London is never truly over. Its influence whispers through the corridors long after the last guest has departed. It lingers in quiet bedrooms, in measured steps through parlor and dining room, in the calm, composed gestures that define the household's daily rhythm. The season's spirit persists not in visible festivity, but in the subtle, enduring, and often invisible work it has performed on those who inhabit the home. In this whispering continuity lies the essence of Victorian domestic life: order, propriety, and calm maintained above all else, quietly sustained by rituals, substances, and expectations that mold both body and mind. The season has ended, yet its presence remains soft, pervasive, and inescapably woven into the fabric of everyday life. Calm endures, appearances persist, and the household, guided by what has been poured, measured, and sipped, moves forward into the year with composure, shaped as much by the season past as by the obligations yet to come.